Welcome everyone to a meeting of the Boston Region MPO Planning Organization. I'm David Mwrta, Secretary Jamie Tessler here. All participants will join the meeting with muted microphones. Please rename yourself to include your first name, last name, and affiliation if you have one. Please do not unmute or mute yourself. To participate in the discussion, please select the raise hand function. You can find this by clicking either on the participants button at the bottom of the screen, and a window will pop up with a raise hand button at the bottom, or on the reactions button in the toolbar. The chair will then call on the participants. If you are on the phone, you can use *9 to raise your hand. If you have any technical difficulties, please contact Sean Rourke via the chat box or at srourke@ctps.org or call him at 857-702-3693. This meeting is accessible to people with disabilities. Zoom products are compliant with exceptions with the following standards: Web Content Accessibility Guidelines 2.1 Level AA standards and revised Section 508 standards. If you require any additional accommodations in order to participate fully in this meeting, please contact Sean Rourke of the MPO staff at srourke@ctps.org or call him at 857-702-3693. Please call the roll, Ann.
Thanks, David. MassDOT Chair,
This is David Moeller. I'm here.
MassDOT Seat 2,
John Bouchard here.
MassDOT Highway, okay, MBTA.
I'm sorry, John Romano here.
Great, thanks, John. MBTA,
Jillian Linnell, representing General Manager Steve Poftak.
Massport, okay. MAPC,
Good morning. This is Eric Barassa with the Metropolitan Area Planning Council.
MBTA Advisory Board,
Good morning, Brian Kane, MBTA Advisory Board, and a happy St. Patrick's Day Evacuation Day in Purim to all.
Advisory Council,
Leonard Diggins Advisory Council here.
City of Boston, BTD, okay. City of Boston, BPDA, At-large City, City of Everett,
Jay Monty, representing Mayor DiMaria in the city of Everett.
At-large City, City of Newton,
Good morning. I'm David Kozis, representing Mayor Ruth Ann Fuller in the city of Newton.
At-large Town, Town of Arlington,
This is Daniel Amstutz, representing Select Board Chair Steve DeCourcy and the town of Arlington.
At-large Town, Town of Brookline,
Heather Hamilton for the town of Brookline.
Intercore Committee, City of Somerville,
Good morning, Tom Bent, representing the city of Somerville and Mayor Katiana Ballantyne in the Intercore.
Minuteman Advisory Group, Town of Acton, okay. Metro West Collaborative, City of Framingham,
Dennis Giambetti, representing Mayor Siskey in the Metro West region.
North Shore Task Force, City of Beverly,
This is Darlene Wynn, representing the North Shore Task Force and Mayor Michael Cahan.
great. North Suburban Planning Council, Town of Burlington, South Shore Coalition, Town of Rockland, Okay. Southwest Advisory Committee, Town of Medway.
Peter Pelletier, Town of Medway.
Three Rivers Interlocal Council, Town of Norwood, Neponset Chamber.
Morning, Tom O'Rourke from the Town of Norwood, representing the Trick Sub-Region.
FHWA.
Good morning, Ken Miller, Federal Highway Administration.
Ann, I think you're muted.
Sorry, yeah, for some reason it muted on its own. So FTA. Okay, and that calls the roll.
Actually, I did see that Jim Fitzgerald joined the meeting during the roll call.
Okay, City of Boston BPDA.
Excellent. Thank you. Sorry for being late. Jim Fitzgerald, BPDA, representing Mayor Wu in the City of Boston.
Great, thank you.
And also, sorry, I do see that Melissa Tentaklis is in the meeting, just maybe had an issue with the unmuting, so I'm going to try it one more time.
Thank you. Melissa Tentaklis, Burlington, North Suburban Planning Council. Thank you.
Okay, anyone else?
Bill Conroy is joining right now. Might take a second. But I think maybe we could move on because this might take a second to for him to connect to audio. Although maybe not. Here, we'll try. Bill Conroy.
Bill Conroy here, representing Mayor Wu for the City of Boston.
Great, and then that calls the roll.
Thank you, Ann. Next item, excuse me. Next item on the agenda is the chair's report. The only thing I'd like to report is that Congress passed and the President signed the Omnibus Appropriations Act for 2022. So we do have a full budget for this year, which means we will have to amend the 22 STIP in order to provide the bill funding to the region. Next up, Executive Director's report. Tegan.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and welcome everybody. I know we have a lot of discussion that we're going to be having today, but I hope you will bear with me as I wanted to continue to give you a few updates on the strategic planning work that the staff is currently engaging in. So I'll try to be brief, but I want to highlight this so that you have an opportunity to reach out and ask questions or give feedback if you have any. I started last meeting and I talked about how we have been implementing the first year of our 5-year strategic plan for the staff to the Boston Region MPO. Again, you've seen that document and it's available online. And if you have any questions, please do reach out to me. I began talking about 17 different activities that we've been working on this year towards the objectives that we have. Last time I talked about those under sector leadership, which involves development of new tools and supporting staff and new opportunities, as well as under programs and services, really focusing on our project management practices. And then this time I wanted to talk a bit about governance and then some changes we're making to our organizational structure and staffing. So again, I will focus on being brief, but under the governance goal in our strategic planning work, one of the things we're looking at is how we work on orienting you all, the board members, when we are bringing you on board and also throughout your experience to sort of support the kind of governance that you want. So we have been looking at how we've been doing these 101 sessions for you and thinking about how we are going to improve future iterations. So that's under governance. The other items are under organizational structure and staffing. And I hope you have noticed that I've been reporting to you on some adjustments and changes we've been making in our reporting structure on staff and how we've been hiring new roles. And just some of the examples that I've brought up already have been how we've restructured the director's positions to split out our work on research and analysis from our project delivery, and also the creation of the new outreach and communications groups that we can enhance our activities in that area. Another set of initiatives or activities we're working on is in terms of identifying and building up our collaboration tools and technologies so that we can support future hybrid work. An early first step was to adopt agency-wide Asana as a tool to be able to better manage our projects and our work and to collaborate better. And then we're performing an inventory of other tools and working to recommend some norms around how we communicate and use those tools. We have also been, in terms of organizational structure and staffing and supporting our staff, we've started a human resources audit, and we've been looking at all of our policies and procedures and look to update those in a way that is kind of best practices in terms of human resources, supporting staff, and providing more career growth and advancement for the MPO staff. We are also updating how we are orienting our staff, looking into how we can follow best practices to improve how we onboard our staff and hopefully also improve how we are able to retain staff. And then we are also looking to revise and change our evaluation process in a way that is more supportive of improving accountability of staff, giving more two-way feedback, and again, supporting career, professional and career growth. So those were, thank you for letting me do that quickly, but I'm very happy to answer any questions. I just want you to be aware of how much work we're doing internally to sort of bolster and support the staff that support this board and all the stakeholders in the region. And in one of the future meetings, I'll talk about the last activities which are related to, for this current year of the implementation, which are related to diversity, equity, and inclusion, as well as our marketing and public presentation goals. So with that, I'll move on to some staffing updates that we have currently 3 open positions on our website. Please share these, send applicants our way. Unfortunately, one of them has been that we had to repost our position for the manager of the Transportation Improvement Program, the TIP. As you know, Matt Genova will be with us for some time yet, but he is planning to move and transition into a new role at some point in the coming months. And so we will certainly have a big shoes to fill in terms of bringing on new support for the TIP. So we are posting that. Please send us good applicants. We also have 2 other positions open for a communications coordinator and administrative support for the board activities that you see. And so we are hoping to hire some great people in those roles as well. So next, I'll provide you with a few outreach and public comment highlights. We've been talking a lot about the Transit Working Group, and I will continue to do so. We hosted a coffee chat on March 10th about human services transportation with special guests from the Executive Office of Health and Human Services. So if you would like to see that, you can go to our YouTube channel for the Boston MPO, and you can actually see that conversation if you wanted to attend and couldn't, or just curious. And then our upcoming coffee chat for the Transit Working Group will be on April 6th, and it will be about the challenge of recruiting and retraining drivers. And that will be facilitated by a team from the FTA-supported Transit Workforce Center. So I think we'll post the link to that chat to that conversation in the chat. And as always, please check out the Transit Working Group webpage or reach out to Sandy Johnston if you have questions, want to be added to the list, or want to attend. Another outreach highlight is that I mentioned last time that we were contacted by a journalist from the Engineering News Record to feature sort of trends in planning and infrastructure and talk about the board's work to update the TIP criteria and scoring process, especially with the emphasis on resiliency and equity goals. And we did find out that the feature should be coming out in print and online in the coming week or so, or next week. So we will share that with you when we do see that. Today's agenda, moving on to that, we have 3 action items. We have to approve some minutes. We'll ask you to talk about and approve, hopefully, a work scope for the addressing equity and access in the Blue Hills scope. And also, we will be talking about and asking you to vote on transit asset management targets for state fiscal year 22. And then an item that a lot of you are waiting for is we will also have a discussion of preliminary project programming scenarios for the federal fiscal year 23 to 27 TIP. And then as a reminder, we will have an additional meeting this month, March 31st. And also our April meetings will be pushed out to April 14th and April 28th to sort of balance out the time between meetings. And on the next meeting, March 31st, we will have some action items around a work scope for equity analysis for free bus fares in Boston. We will talk about the state fiscal year transit safety performance targets. And then we will be hopefully talking about and getting your approval on a final project programming scenario for the TIP for federal fiscal years 23 through 27. And as part of that conversation, we will also have a presentation by the Cape Ann Transit Authority and the Metro West Regional Transit Authority, the 2 RTAs, on their capital planning processes. And that, Mr. Chair, is it. And I'm happy to answer any questions that there might be.
Thank you, Tegan. Any questions for Tegan? Daniel Amstutz?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just a thought or comment about the first item that Tegan, that you talked about regarding the staff sort of reorganization or that work. I think I'd be interested myself and I would hope other MPO members maybe in the future, in a couple months or something, to have a more maybe full agenda item about that, as opposed to just sort of these snippets in the little executive director's report. So that's personally, I'd like to hear a bit more. Thanks.
Thank
Thank you,
you.
Dan.
Happy to oblige.
Any other questions for Tegan? Seeing none, next item on the agenda is public comments. Jeremy Marset. Please state your name for the record.
Sure, thank you. Good morning, Jeremy Marset. I'm the Director of Public Works for the town of Natick, and I'd like to thank you for the opportunity to advocate for the regionally important project to reconstruct the interchange of Route 9 and Route 27 in Natick. It's identified as Mass DOT project number 605313. So a number of years ago, to help inform this project, the town funded a study and evaluation of this interchange. The project advanced to a 25% design, and a public hearing was held in 2017. After that initial public hearing, Mass DOT retained the services of a new consultant, and the design of the interchange was re-envisioned with subsequent public information meetings held in 2019 and 2021. The project now has broad public support and has been identified as a long-standing community priority. The existing bridge at the interchange is both structurally and functionally deficient. The current interchange is a high crash location and does not provide safe bicycle and pedestrian accommodations for the nearby schools, commercial and recreational destinations and adjacent residential areas. The interchange is a regional crossroad, providing connectivity and access to the Metro West commercial area, and is a gateway to the so-called Golden Triangle economic development area. In addition to the many private employers in the area, this interchange provides access to the Natick Army Soldier Systems Center. That center employs over 2,000 military, civilian, and contract professionals, and annually infuses over $135 million into the local economy. The new design team has developed an alternative proposal with considerable stakeholder engagement that complements the adjacent Route 27 corridor project that is currently under construction by Mass DOT. This project is rapidly approaching a 25% design stage, and we anticipate a formal public hearing later in 2022. The town of Natick urges the MPO support for this important project and thanks Mass DOT for their partnership.
Thank you, Mr. Marset. Mayor Ballantine.
Good morning, everybody. Thank you for having me. I'm Katiana Ballantyne. I'm the mayor of Somerville. Thank you for the opportunity to address the board. I'm here respectfully to request your support for the McGrath Boulevard project. But first, I wanted to introduce myself a little to you. I was born and orphaned in Greece. I was adopted there by my Scottish father and my Czech German mother. We're a family of immigrants, and we immigrated to the United States when I was 4. I was the first and only one in my family to go to college, worked 2 jobs, took out loans, and to get a BA and an MBA. I've been working for over 30 years. I spent about 16 years in international supply chain management, moved over into the nonprofit world because I wanted my professional career to be something that was mission driven. So working in affordability, housing, jobs, connections to that, and transportation to that. In Boston for large nonprofit developers, and certainly volunteering here in Somerville. And I've been served 8 years on the city council. I am fortunate now and humbled to be mayor of Somerville. I want you to know that I'm a car-free family, intentionally made those decisions. I'm a working mom of 2. I bike my children for nearly a decade across McGrath O'Brien to go to school. And here at the MPO, Somerville represents the inner core, and I'm a regionalist. When I moved to the Boston area, I lived for 4 years in Chelsea. I didn't have a car. I used public transportation to get to my job in Lynn, on the Lynnway. The building doesn't exist anymore. It was warehouses just across from Point of Pines. I ride my bike, I'd use public transit. And then while in Chelsea, you know, I had to drive a car to go to Brockton to work there for a couple of years. And then finally, you know, made it closer into the inner belt or inner region with Boston and with Cambridge, working there. And so I use public transit daily. Whether it's the bus or whether it's the T, and I've done that for decades. I understand where the snafu points are, and I really look at Somerville and my role here as mayor as a regional role, understanding the intersections of transit and how, as we view transportation, we need to look at it as working together on that. So under my administration, you can expect Somerville to bring the same work ethic to the table every month, the same listening skills, the same commitment to coalition building. And to know that, you know, I've lived here for nearly 3 decades. I want the stakeholders to know that the McGrath Boulevard is a regional project, not a Somerville project. Over the years, the MPO board has consistently endorsed McGrath because it advances regional priorities for safety, equity, and climate action. Our partners at MassDOT are managing the project design, coordinating closely with city staff. We believe that the project deserves an initial allocation of construction funding to begin in 2027. This commitment will help the city coordinate adjacent municipal utility and street work over the next several years. It will also strengthen our ability to generate funding support through development mitigation. So the MPO does not need to fund the full project cost alone. My staff are here to answer any questions from the board, and thank you for your consideration and for your public service.
Thank you, Mayor, and my apologies for mispronouncing your name. Next up is Senator Will Brownsberger.
Thank you very much, Chairman Mueller. And I want to begin by saying how much I've come to respect this process and the work that you do at this table, setting priorities for the region. It is the best process as I look across the capital planning mechanisms of the different state agencies. You guys do it best, and I appreciate the opportunity, the way you give us all an opportunity to participate and know how the plans are moving forward. I am appearing on behalf of the Belmont Community Path Project. I want to just give a brief history, talk a little bit about where the community's been, and then put it in regional perspective. This project has been in gestation since the early 90s. The Belmont Selectmen first formed a committee to look at putting a bike path in this space. At some point before I was selectman, I believe it had been in progress for 6 years before I became selectman in 1998. Through the years since then, for the last 24 years, first as selectman, then as state representative, and then as state senator, I've been part of this process. And the process has had many twists and turns, many ups and downs. Belmont is a town meeting, selectman form of government. Everybody has a voice in the town of Belmont, and every voice gets heard. And this is a project that affects different abutters, and the abutters have had a huge voice, and their participation has led to this project going through multiple committee phases, starts, restarts. But at this point, the project has settled into a groove of clarity about where it needs to go, how it needs to work. We are at the 25% design phase. The town meeting has voted repeatedly in favor of the project. The way the project has worked, it's been funded by Community Preservation Act funds, the design funding. So that has had to come before town meeting for approval. It's been approved again and again, most recently by an overwhelming margin. I want to say it was 220 to 40. So there's huge community support for this project at this point after a lot of vetting. And I think it's a great design. I think it's going to benefit the community enormously. But from your perspective, more importantly, it's going to benefit the region. This is a link in the regional rail trail that will connect all the way out through Hudson. When this project is done, we've had one leg from Cambridge to Belmont, this first leg through Belmont, then there's one more leg through Belmont. Then you get to a gorgeous set of trail out through Waltham and onwards to the west. So this is a very exciting fundamental project for the region. And I want to let you know, as one elected official that's been on record from this project for many years now, I am absolutely committed to being a good partner to this MPO and making sure that if you program this, and I beg you to do so, this project will keep moving the way it should. And I know that the town leadership feels the same way. And I thank you very much for giving me the opportunity to address you.
Thank you, Senator. Next up is Representative Dave Rogers.
Yes, good morning. Thanks for the opportunity to speak to you today. And I would echo much of what Senator Brownsberger just said. I'm here to speak on behalf of the Belmont Community Path. This project has incredibly broad community support, extremely popular. And to the extent there have been concerns from abutters, there's been a really rigorous process to hear out their concerns and address them. So that's the first thing I want to make clear. This is a really popular project in town. The other thing I want to highlight, again, as Senator Brownsberger said, is that this is a key regional component and will link a key link in the Mass Central Rail Trail project. It also links to the Minuteman Path, which is really widely used. It goes through Arlington and Lexington out to Bedford. So it's a key link to also the Somerville, Cambridge part of that path. So it has a regional impact. The other thing I'd like to highlight is that it has environmental and public health benefits. Obviously, fewer cars on the road, more people walking, and biking is good for the environment. There's an environmental justice community nearby in the Ringe Towers. So it has an equity piece. And of course, we do deal with an obesity problem in America and in Massachusetts. And so to get more people walking, more people biking, more people outside is a good thing. It has a public safety component because the way cyclists move through town now is not always protected and is unsafe. And plus there's going to be an underpass that will improve pedestrian safety. So for all the reasons I've just cited, it's an outstanding project. I really appreciate your careful attention to it. And again, as Senator Brownsberger said, you can count on us being strong partners with you, working with you to bring this to reality. It's been a long time coming, and we think we're really ready to go forward now, and would greatly appreciate your support. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Representative. Next up is Josh Ostroff.
Good morning, all. Thank you for the opportunity to comment. I am appearing before you today as chair of the Town of Natick Transportation Advisory Committee, although like many of us, I wear other hats, and want to amplify DPW Director Marsette's comments in support of the Route 927 interchange project. I won't repeat his well-stated arguments in support of MPO funding for this critically important regional project. But I do want to just focus on the integration of multimodal planning into this design. It is going to be a signature project to facilitate bicycle and pedestrian connectivity, both to the nearby Constituent Rail Trail and to many of the schools and other resources that are nearby. So I appreciate the consideration of the MPO in supporting this project. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Next up is Tanya Lilick.
Hi, thank you and good morning. Thank you for the opportunity to provide comment. I am commenting with regards to number 10 on the agenda. And I am here on behalf of the Open Space and Recreation Plan Committee for the town of Swampscott, and they're seeking support for their seeking MPO funds for the Swampscott Rail Trail construction project 610666. I just wanted to say that the rail trail is one of the biggest objectives of the Swampscott's 2013 and 2020 Open Space and Recreation Plan. It has been identified as a top priority by residents in the town's master plan. It will link neighborhood schools, parks, and the Mbta commuter rail station. It will give parents of all three schools, elementary schools, a safe and then the high school, a safe and active transit solution that would reduce air pollution, encourage fitness and a healthy lifestyle through increased walking and biking. It will reduce traffic by offering an alternate commuter option of biking to the train station for both not only Swampscott, Marblehead residents as well. It will contribute significantly to the creation of our green corridor network, also a planned goal. It will also encourage a healthy, active community through social opportunities on the trail, as well as a connection to nature for mental health. And lastly, will fill a recognized critical gap in the regional trail network and add additional mileage to the East Coast Greenway and the Border to Boston Trail. So I appreciate your consideration for the town of Swampscott and their rail trail, and thank you very much.
Thank you. Next is Russ Lino.
Hi, Mr. Chair. Thank you so much. My name is Russ Lino. I'm the chair of the Belmont Community Path Project Committee, which is a volunteer committee appointed by the Belmont Select Board to really oversee the design process for the Belmont Community Path. I am here obviously to advocate for programming the Belmont Community Path for funding. And I have to say I was so pleased to see that at least in the preliminary funding scenarios that were posted, it does appear to be programmed. I think that's a wonderful development. And I would certainly urge the MPO to follow through and finalize that programming. As you heard from Senator Brownsberger and Representative Rogers, and as I'm sure you'll hear from a few others during this public comment session, the Belmont Community Path has very broad and deep support within our community of Belmont, and with very good reason. It will address really key safety, pedestrian bicycle safety issues in town, most notably with the underpass, also with the crossing at Brighton Street, adjacent to the commuter rail, which connects to the existing Fitchburg cutoff path. Those are both extremely unsafe areas right now. And this project will address them. From a regional perspective, you already heard from the senator, but this is a key gap in the Mass Central Rail Trail. Weston and Wayland have completed their sections of the MTRT. To our west, Waltham just went out to bid on their section of the MTRT earlier this year. They're not going through the TIP process, funding it themselves, but we are really going to stick out as a key gap in the MTRT without constructing this. And just even the recent Metropolitan Area Planning Council report, Trails Inventory report, highlighted that gap and called out the Belmont Community Path as a key gap that could really address a key environmental justice concern, as was referenced. So it is a very, very worthy project. As you've also heard, we in town, along with our elected representatives, all the way up through Representative Clark, Senator Brownsberger, Representative Rogers, our select board, our school committee, our town meeting, and all the volunteer folks like myself who are working on this are extremely, extremely committed to bringing this project to fruition. We are 100% funded for the design piece through primarily through Community Preservation Act funding. So we are ready to go all the way through design. We had a chance to speak with our MassDOT project manager. He's assured us that the MassDOT's review of the 25% design is proceeding at pace, and that they expect to finish it really within the next couple of weeks, and hopefully get us the design public hearing as soon as they can. So again, we are committed to carrying this out. Also, as referenced, we have throughout this project, and certainly will continue to have a very open process. We really want to engage with abutters, with all members of the community, with folks who are opposed to the path, which there are some. And we have done that, and the design has changed in material ways due to those interactions. And we want that to continue. There remain some concerns. Many of them, I think, are more in the nature of things that will need to be addressed as the project moves towards 75% design, more about aesthetics and treatments and that sort of thing. And we are really committed to doing that. That's part of our role. I think you'll hear that from anyone who's working on this project. And look, the fact that the MPO hears from folks about this project, even opponents of this project, I think actually illustrates how transparent the process has been, because folks are aware of it in town. It is a well-known project. Finally, I just want to say on a note, I know Matt Genova has announced he's going to be departing from the MPO. I just want to say for the record how much my committee and the town of Belmont has appreciated our interactions with him. He's been really wonderful at explaining what can be a complicated and sometimes confusing process to us, and just an invaluable resource, so responsive, so helpful. So I just want to say again for the record how much we appreciate that and wish him the best. And I will close by just asking again that the MPO program this project for construction funding in as soon a fiscal year as it deems feasible, and we will be ready. So thank you very much for the time. I really appreciate it.
Thank you. Jared Gensel. Wait a minute.
I didn't have the permission to be unmute. Thank you. So I'm Jared Gensel. I'm the chair of the Friends of the Belmont Community Path, a community organization. I wanted to further highlight other comments by saying that community engagement continues to grow as the project moves forward. In 2021, 384 people wrote letters to the MPO, with 361 of those, or 94%, in support of phase 1, which is project number 609-204 in the tip. Thanks again to the MPO staff for handling all those letters. We're going to have a more streamlined process for you this year. As Senator Brownsberger mentioned, there was overwhelming support from town meeting last year for funding to support the right-of-way exploration. People were excited to review the 25% design in a public meeting last fall. We've had a lot more engagement with high school students and clubs who are engaged to explore how it enhances access to and the beauty of the campus that is adjacent to this path. And we are really excited today to see the path included in 2 scenarios that will be discussed by the MPO. With the Waltham path moving forward, as was mentioned before, to construction, there's going to even be more excitement to close this gap in Belmont for the Mass Central Rail Trail and make this a really exciting regional extension to the path network that already exists. So thanks again for your work and your support of this. And the community is really excited to see it move forward.
Thank you. Next up is Allison Burson.
Hi, everyone. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Wonderful. I am Allison Burson from the Solomon Foundation, and the Solomon Foundation works to support greenways and trails and active transportation connections in urban areas across the Commonwealth. And to start off, I sort of want to echo and support everyone's comments so far today. And just, it's so wonderful to see so many communities working on really important regional and local trail connections. I also want to echo the huge thanks to Matt Genova. I would say that sort of personally for myself, I wouldn't understand the MPO process if he hadn't been patient enough to many times talk me through and explain it. And while I'd like to talk on every single project people have talked about today, I am here today to focus on talking about a project the Solomon Foundation has provided some financial support for, which is the Swampscott Rail Trail. And the Solomon Foundation 3+ years ago began to focus on this project and provide support to it as we were so excited to see nearing completion and plan for construction of the Northern Strand Trail. And we started to ask, how will that important regional connection connecting Boston, beginning to connect up toward our northern communities, what happens when that construction's finished? What's next? And with MAPC's landlines group, we hosted a planning meeting and rides with North Shore communities. And coming out of that, with conversation with those communities, we saw Swampscott's the next piece after the Northern Strand. And we wanted to provide support to matching funding to the town so that they could begin to test one section of trail. And when we saw after they had that one section built, which they were able to build faster than, in a month, faster than we've ever seen any trail be constructed in the area, we provided support, again, matching funding for them to do that next phase so that people in town could see it and didn't need to go north or south to enjoy trails. And as Tanya said, this is a super important local connection to schools, to train. It's a really important transportation asset as well as a recreation and green space asset. It's a really important regional connection, and it's part of the East Coast Greenway, so 3,000-mile connection connecting communities from Maine to Florida. The last piece I want to say, as the Solomon Foundation has worked on trails and greenway projects for 15 years, we know that for trail projects, neighbors very reasonably have concerns. There are changes, there will be something new they're unfamiliar with, and we know that there need to be conversations about that. What we tend to see is that usually, even though this is an important regional connection, usually it's those who live nearest the trails who they're the ones out walking every morning, walking their dogs, visiting with neighbors. It tends to be such an important local asset. And often it's the local residents who, even if they'd had concerns and those concerns do need to be addressed, once the trail is built, so often the people who are the most concerns become the strongest supporters, enjoyers of the trail, spokespeople for it, and stewards. So that's a sort of eye toward history, and we hope that this will be the case here, that concerns will be addressed and that this will become a really incredible community asset locally, first and foremost, as well as regionally. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Next is David Coleman.
Hi, my name is David Coleman. I'm chair of the Transportation Advisory Committee for the town of Belmont. And I'd actually like to comment on two projects and two applications that we have forward of you. The first, of course, is the community path. And I can tell you that the community path, people have mentioned how it connects to the neighboring towns. The community path is going to perform a vital function within Belmont, which is to act as an artery to go safely across town, especially for our students. We've just constructed a new high school, which is going to be, as you well know, right next to the Alexander Underpass. The community path, when it's completed in its full form, would extend out through Waverly Square. Right now, all of the students who are coming from that area do not have a safe way, to get over to the high school by bicycle. This would provide the safest form of transportation that they could get. And the underpass, of course, would provide the first safe passage for any student who's trying to access the high school, but also the pool, the library, and our other main services that are all located on Concord Avenue. So that's a huge benefit. When the high school was open this last fall, it was just being finished, and the planned bike racks were not yet installed. But as a feature of the design, the high school has a large overhang that's in front of the building, and the staff put a few bicycle racks in there to take what students would come. Well, we've had a consistent ridership of over 130 bicycles for every day up through December for the high school. It's been a huge turnout of students who have chosen to cycle. They had to add more bike racks underneath that covering. And it was that covering that made us realize that we have this additional need, which is for safe and protected bike racks and storage. So additionally, we have an application from Jeff Roth for covered bike racks for the Chenery Middle School. It's a small proof of concept project, because we've begun working with Safe Routes to School with Judy Crocker, and in trying to encourage more cycling through the elementary schools and the middle school. The middle school right now has about 1,400 students. It's a huge draw. It has no protected, bike racks. So we're hoping for favorable consideration for that small project. But again, this has been a big boost for Belmont cycling, and the TAC is also considering at this point. We're planning for our first protected bike lane along Concord Avenue that would be striped this summer. So thank you for any favorable consideration, and appreciate the time.
Thank you. Next up, Zarian Clausen.
Good morning. Thank you, Mr. Chair and board members for the opportunity to speak briefly. Couple projects I just wanted to hit on before I talked a little bit about Western Ave is the Linfield Street project in the city of Lynn. Just an update on that, and that it's on target for construction in this year and meeting the FY22 design requirements and implementation requirements. It's been a long-standing project that's been before this board for a long time, and really the community appreciates your endurance in supporting that project to this point. The second one is the Essex Street project that's programmed for FY24. Just a brief note that we continue to enjoy strong public support for that project and administrative support from the new mayor in the city of Lynn, and expect we'll be able to meet those timeframes for that important project for the city. But for today, really wanted to hit on the Western Ave Reconstruction project. This is project number 609246. It's essentially a 2-mile reconstruction of Western Ave, a regional serving transportation corridor, beginning in Center Street in Lynn and ending at Eastern Ave, essentially where MassDOT is advancing a design for Highland Ave into Salem. So there's a connection for future improvements into the city. But it's an important multimodal corridor for our community in the region on the North Shore. And just a quick reference to the scoring that has taken place, and really appreciate the kind of rigor that goes into that analysis. This project, I believe, is the highest scoring project under consideration for this round, at least in the complete street category. And I think that speaks to how this project meets and addresses the key objectives that the MPO has created around system preservation, congestion mitigation, equity, sustainability, and economic development indicators. It really does address all of those across the board. One key piece for us is improvements to safety for all users. It is a corridor that unfortunately features 4 top 200 crash locations, 9 8-zip crash clusters, and is widely known within the community as a problematic place to travel. The design is advancing under complete street standards. and we see it improving safety for all users, particularly with respect to pedestrians and bicyclists, and improving those facilities. We're also looking to include transit priority as a part of that reconstruction project. So I think it ticks all the boxes in terms of project need and opportunity, both for the city and the region. Just commenting briefly on public engagement, there's already been public meetings where we're seeing strong support for the project generally, strong support from city council members and the mayor. Recently, we went through a 1.5-year planning process with MassDOT, partnering with MassDOT, called the Safe Streets for People Playbook. And this planning process was designed and implemented largely because the city, unfortunately, features one of the highest concentrations of high crash locations in the Commonwealth. And it was intended to kind of really come at this challenge strategically and engage the community deeply in that process. And just noting that this section of the corridor was identified as one of the priority needs for the community, and was vetted by the public in that process. So we enjoyed really strong support moving this forward, and look forward to working with the state, to MassDOT and the Boston MPO to move this towards final design and implementation, and ask that the board consider including this in this tip round. So if there's any questions you have, I'm happy to answer them. Thank you.
Thank you. Next up is Aaron Workman.
Good morning. My name is Erin Wortman. I'm the Director of Planning and Community Development for the town of Stoneham, and I'm here to speak on the Stoneham Shuttle Community Connections application, which creates first and last mile solutions that's complementary to existing MBTA bus service, that supports existing workforce needs, the local desires to have reliable shared mobility, and supports the Commonwealth's climate goals. We believe this funding will enable Stoneham to develop a thoughtful transit operation that has the ability to be flexible, and we envision expanding it to other communities as the service gains capacity. Our existing partners are thrilled about the opportunity for this service, and I want to thank you for your consideration on the Stoneham Shuttle project. Thanks.
Thank you. Next up is Sean Fitzgerald.
Top of the morning to you. Thank you. My name is Sean Fitzgerald. I'm Swampscott's town administrator. I'm here to just express my strong support for the Swampscott Rail Trail and the town's request to have this project included in the FY 23 to 27 Transportation Improvement Program. This is a really critical missing link that will connect the Northern Strand Community Path with Marblehead and the Salem Community Path. It will also add additional off-road mileage to the East Coast Greenway and the border to the Boston Trail. Clearly, this shared use trail will provide a high quality recreational program. We all know that we are in need of these types of investments right after this pandemic, and this trail will create a safe, accessible, high quality experience for our whole community. It's important to note that this does connect to an MBTA train station and supports a connection for our students. Swampscott is one of the most densely settled communities in the Commonwealth, and having this trail will help support pedestrian safety and help us really support a safe access to schools. We have had fatalities on our roads, and so we are all mindful that this type of investment will support safety. It also is a wonderful way for us to become a more inclusive community. We are a community that really wants to see a trail that connects us to the region, and certainly would just share that we have a whole wide support of community supporters and friends of our rail trail program that is seeking private funds and in-kind donations, as you heard from Allison and the Solomon Foundation. So with that, I respectfully ask that you fund this project as part of the FY 23 and 27 TIP program. And I wish you all a very happy St. Patrick's Day.
Thank you. Next up is Mark Palillo.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mark Palillo, member of the Select Board in the town of Belmont. I want to thank the MPO for the opportunity to speak today. On behalf of the Belmont Community Path, I echo many of the comments that Senator Brownsberger provided, as well as Representative Rogers and the chair of our Community Path Project Committee, Russ Lino, and others that have spoken about it as well. I strongly urge the MPO to consider funding this path for the next TIP program. It has been an issue that we've been dealing with for the past well over 30 years. Certainly in my time, it's my 4th term on the select board. In my prior 3 terms, it was a matter that continues to sort of be an issue for our community. There is overwhelming support within town for this community path. I think you've heard from others about the need for this path to connect on the Mass Central Rail Trail as well. It really moves us forward from a pedestrian safety perspective by allowing individuals in town to use the path for not only for cycling, but also for walking. You've heard about the underpass at Alexander Avenue, connects the north side of Belmont to the new middle and high school campus as well. There is very much strong support. We're anxious about moving this forward. We feel as though we're at the cusp of realizing, at least the first phase of this path. We certainly have phase 2 we need to consider as well. So we appreciate your support. Strongly urge that you do consider funding it during this TIP cycle. And also want to comment as well and commit that the current select board strongly endorses this project. We're also very much strongly committed to continuing to keep the lines of communication open with the abutters to this path and other stakeholders to listen and address their concerns. So again, Mr. Chair, thank you for the time to speak today. And I also want to thank the MPO as well. Have a good day.
Thank you. Alexis Runstatler.
Good morning. I'm Alexa.
Oh, wait, you're muted again. Hold on a second. Can somebody help unmute? There you go. There we go.
Good morning. I'm Alexis Runstadler. I'm a Swampscott resident. I'm also president of the community group Friends of the Swampscott Rail Trail. Our group's mission is to advocate for the Swampscott Rail Trail and fundraise for its creation, as well as maintenance and beautification of the trail. Besides echoing what other speakers have already said, I would like to bring to your attention 2 milestone events that have occurred since I spoke before you a year ago. The first is that last October, Swampscott voters approved the construction of a new consolidated elementary school, which means that after the school's completion in 2024, the Swampscott Rail Trail could provide safe off-road transportation to school for all of Swampscott students ages kindergarten through 4. We are a small, dense community, and this is a unique opportunity to create a tremendous benefit with the completion of just this 2-mile stretch of trail within our larger North Shore Trail network. The second is that in August 2021, the Friends presented the town of Swampscott with $150,000 from our community fundraising efforts. This was one of the largest gifts the town has ever received from a community organization, and it demonstrates the depth of support within our community. We made this gift in part to ensure that the town would be able to finish the additional design and engineering required to complete the 25% design work. And over the past year, I've heard from thousands of residents through the Friends outreach efforts that they are using, they're enjoying the 2 completed segments, and they are eagerly awaiting the completion of the trail with its further connections to schools and parks and the commuter rail station. For all of these reasons, as well as those you've heard from the other speakers and in the letters of support you've received, I urge you to program the Swampscott Rail Trail construction project for the 23-27 TIP funding. And thanks for the opportunity to speak again today.
Thank you. Next up is Jeffrey Roth.
Yeah, hi, good morning. My name is Jeff Roth from Belmont, and I just wanted to say briefly about the Chenery Middle School bike parking application that we have, and I spoke a couple weeks ago about that as well. we did have an additional support letter from the Chenery PTO that I guess wasn't included in the packet, but that's another independent organization that voiced support for this project. I realize there's hesitation about funding such a small project, and the obvious question is why Belmont cannot pay for this. And just to provide some background, we have approached the school department and private organizations over many years, several years going back about 6 years, but nothing has materialized for funding up to this point. It is a small project, but there is high payoff in terms of showing the need for the town to fund more covered bike parking at other schools. And as David Coleman mentioned earlier, talking about our new high school in Belmont, we've seen a dramatic increase in kids biking to school, in part thanks to the much improved bike parking infrastructure there. And I realize there's grant overhead from a staffing perspective, but at least this would be a one-time procurement requiring less oversight than other projects. So thanks a lot for your consideration and including this on the tip cycle up to from that is I know you're currently discussing. And I also just wanted to say thanks so much for considering the Belmont Community Path, as many as have voiced support for that. That's a critical transportation link for our town, and something that will provide a lot of options for walking and biking through Belmont that doesn't exist and currently. And I hope you'll also include that as well. So thanks so much for your time, Mr. Chairman. I very much appreciate it.
Thank you. Next up is Eric Sofin.
Hi, thank you. I'm Eric Sofin. I work at MathWorks in Natick, and I'm here to speak in favor of the Route 27, Route 9 interchange project. So MathWorks has offices located essentially diagonally across this interchange. I'm a year-round bike commuter and have biked and run through this intersection many times. Right now, it's unsafe for all modes with crumbling sidewalk and complicated merges. And the proposed design has dramatic improvements, particularly for bicycle, pedestrian, and transit modes. With the completion of the Constituent Rail Trail, there's been a surge in bike commuting interest in the area. And Route 27 provides an important connection to the rail trail. As we return to the office, I'm increasingly having colleagues come to me asking about starting to bike commute, asking about routes and connections to the CRT. If they're coming from the Northeast, 27 is the obvious route. And so with that, I'd just like to thank you for your work on this. And I hope to see this this bridge replacement and interchange come to fruition soon. Thank you.
Thank you. Next up is Rich Benevento.
Good morning, and thank you, Mr. Chairman. This has been going on for a while this morning, so I'll be very brief. I'm here this morning representing the city of Beverly, the city of Everett, the city of Lynn, the city of Peabody, the city of Watertown, and the city of Woburn, and also the town of Brookline. I'm here this morning in the event that questions do come up during the MPO's deliberations about the current tip and also programming for the 23 through 27 tip. Those communities that I mentioned represent 7 projects that are currently programmed and 2 projects that are being considered. I won't go into the merits of the project. The scoring of those projects is evident. They're all in the high 70s and 60s. So, Mr. Clausen from the city of Lynn already talked about the Weston Ave project in Lynn, which I believe has a score of 74.9. So again, I'm just here this morning in the event that the questions do come up during the deliberations. I know 3 projects are on the readiness and cost update list for selected projects, that being Bridge Street in Beverly, Peabody Central Street, and Mount Auburn Street in Watertown. So again, just here this morning to provide any information that the MPO may be needing. And also, as I understand it, St. Patrick was born in Italy, so I think St. Patrick was actually Italian. So I'm sure everybody will be Googling that after this.
Thank you. Next up is C. Bowen.
Good morning. Thank you. I'm Catherine Bowen speaking on behalf of the for the Belmont Community Path Project. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, fabulous. Thanks. So I'm here in support of the Community Path Project as a representative of the school committee serving on the town created committee, the Community Path Project Committee. I'm greatly appreciative of the MPO's work and thoughtfulness of scoring projects and laying out a funding strategy. And I'm very appreciative that in two of your scenarios, we may see the path move forward. I want to re-emphasize some of the points that you've heard today. Clearly, this project is in support of the MPO's regional planning goals as it addresses a key gap in the Central Rail Trail. These goals also include critical safety improvements in relation to the commuter rail, which have been pointed out with respect to the proposed underpass and the crossing at Brighton Street. I don't think we could emphasize those enough. In relation to other goals, certainly active transportation is supported. This pathway as the Central Rail Trail gap really supports a very strong active corridor, much like we see in Arlington and other communities. And certainly it can't be said enough how positively it would connect Belmont to our own surrounding communities, much the way some of our roadways do. I want to underscore as well Belmont's readiness. I appreciated Will Brownsberger's statement, "We are in a good groove." I don't think that could be said too many times. Belmont is absolutely ready to move this project forward. I know you've received many letters from town committees and officials, as well as community residents. I want to point out one process piece that I don't know if it is as clearly evident, but as a committee, I see us as having undergone effectively two pre-25% design hearings, one in the summer of 2020, where we received a substantial amount of comments and took a considerable amount of time to respond to all of those comments. And I know we will continue to be responsive to community input as well as MassDOT input and others. That resulted in the November pre-25% design hearing, where we overwhelmingly heard support for the community. And the largest takeaway message for me as a member was, how could we do it sooner? So I think what stood out for me was we had attended to so many of the comments. And so I was very pleased with our hearing and enthusiastically look forward to what we will see with our 25% MassDOT hearing. So thank you. Those are my comments for the community path. And I would like to simply add one comment for the small project that is recently proposed for the Chenery Middle School. Just to round out the comments that you've heard, I would like to say that the Transportation Advisory Committee and others have looked carefully at the surrounding streets. So you might consider this covered bike rack as a small investment, certainly as a proof of concept. The roadways have been looked at carefully and improvements have been made to make sure the signage, some painted markings and sidewalks improvements have been done on some of those roads that lead certainly between the high school and the middle school. So this would dovetail very nicely. And I do think it would be also a positive indicator to the community. So thank you again. I appreciate your work.
Thank you. And then there is one public commenter who had to leave for a medical appointment, and he texted Matt Archer and asked him to please read his comment into the record. So Matt, can you do that now?
Absolutely. Thank you, Mr. Chair. So Jonathan Lehman of the Friends of the Swampscott Rail Trail, I want to say. Swampscott Rail Trail, yes. Says, I appreciate the opportunity to speak on behalf of the Swampscott Rail Trail and echo the two comments already made. I have participated in used bicycle sales for the past year at our summer farmers market. We have already donated over $150,000 raised from donated bicycles toward this project, and more fundraisers are planned. We appreciate your support so that we can complete this project. Thank you very much. And that is the comment, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Matt. Next item on the agenda is committee chairs reports. Brian Kane, I believe you have one.
Why, thank you, Mr. Chair.
You're very welcome,
The
Brian.
AF committee met this morning. Was our quarterly meeting. We heard from staff an update on spending and budget for fiscal 22, as well as updates from the executive director, and had a discussion on staff office space needs and future possible needs. The committee will likely meet again in April, and all are welcome to attend. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Brian. Next up is Regional Transportation Advisory Council report. Lynn?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. At our March meeting, we had Sandy come and talk with us as the new freight manager, and he gave us his take on how he's intending to approach freight issues. And Steve Olenoff reminded some of us and informed some of us about the advisory council's role in getting the MPO to have a focus on freight. And Matt Snova talked with us about the TIP University, and I'm excited to say that on next Wednesday at 2:30, we're activating our 3C committee earlier so that we can be more advisory with respect to the choices that are made for this upcoming TIP. So everyone's welcome to join us in that. The link is on MPO's website. Thank you.
Thank you, Lynn. Next item is the approval of the MPO minutes of February 3rd. Can I get a motion in a second to approve the minutes? And please state your name for the record when making the motion. Eric Barassa.
This is Eric Barassa with MAPC. I make a motion to approve the minutes of February 3rd.
Is there a second? Tom Bent.
Tom Bent, City of Somerville. I second that motion.
Motion having been made and seconded. Is there any comments, changes, questions, or suggestions? Seeing and hearing none, please call the roll in.
Okay, MassDOT Chair,
Yes.
MassDOT Seat 2,
John Bouchard, yes.
MassDOT Highway,
John Romano, yes.
MBTA,
Jillian Linnell, yes.
Massport,
Lee, yes.
MAPC,
Eric Barassa, yes.
MBTA Advisory Board,
Brian Kane, yes.
Advisory Council,
Hunter Tiggins, yes.
City of Boston BTD,
Might have an audio issue, maybe circle back.
okay. City of Boston BPDA,
Bill Conroy, yes.
And Jim Fitzgerald, yes.
On our call.
thank you. Everett,
Jay Monty, yes.
Newton,
David Kozis, yes.
Arlington,
Daniel Amstutz, yes.
Brookline,
Heather Hamilton, yes.
Somerville,
Tom Bent, yes.
Acton,
Austin Saginaw with abstains.
Framingham,
Dennis Giabetti, yes.
Beverly,
Darlene Wynn, yes.
Burlington,
Burlington, yes.
Rockland, okay. And she did join, right, Matt?
TJ might just be having an audio issue.
Okay. Medway,
Town of Medway votes yes.
and the chamber.
Tom O'Rourke, yes.
Okay, and Rockland, okay, that motion passes, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Next item on the agenda is the work scope addressing equity and access in the Blue Hills. Sean Work.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and good morning, everyone. My name is Sean Rourke, and I'm the Manager of Outreach and Communications at the MPO. The work scope I'm asking you to approve is titled Addressing Equity and Access in the Blue Hills. This is an MPO-funded study with a $40,000 budget scheduled to be completed by the end of the federal fiscal year in September. As background, a coalition that includes the Urban Outdoors Association, Friends of the Blue Hills, and the Mattapan Food and Fitness Coalition approached MPO staff and the UPWP committee in early 2021 with a request to study public transit access to the Blue Hills. MPO staff drafted a proposal and the MPO voted to fund the study. This study will examine the issue of equity of access to the Blue Hills Reservation and addresses both the transportation equity and capacity management and mobility goals established in the long-range transportation plan. I'm sure most of you know this, but the Blue Hills Reservation is a state park located 10 miles south of downtown Boston, and it's a popular outdoor recreation destination for Boston area residents. However, despite being less than 4 miles from Mattapan and 7 miles from Roxbury, Blue Hills is difficult to reach and navigate by public transit, presenting an issue of unequal access for those who don't own or have access to cars, and particularly low-income Boston area residents. Throughout the process of this study, staff will first assemble an advisory group of community and advocacy leaders to identify barriers to accessing Blue Hills and the effects of those barriers on the populations they serve. Then we will review and analyze the existing limited public transit options to access Blue Hills from Boston neighborhoods with high concentrations of transit equity populations. And finally, we will identify potential solutions to improve public transit access. This work will involve staff from the outreach and communications, certification activities, and transit analysis and planning teams at CTPS. A notable aspect of this study is that we'll be working with an advisory group of community and advocacy leaders throughout the process to collaborate on identifying solutions that meet the needs of the communities they serve. We hope this work will serve as a model for future equity and access studies of this type and provide a foundation to strengthen our relationships with these groups. The final product of the study will be a report on the MPO website and a presentation that documents our collaboration with the advisory group and the findings of the study, including the possible solutions we identify to improve transit access. If you have any questions, I would be happy to answer them. And at the end of the discussion, I ask that you approve the work scope. Thank you.
Thank you, Sean. Questions from the members for Sean? Daniel Amstutz.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just a quick question. It sounds like from reading it that is it only looking at public transit access? Is it looking at all at bicycle access from those areas?
This study is examining transit access, but through the process of the outreach we've done so far for this study, I know that MAPC is currently working on a study to study pedestrian and bicycle access.
That's great. Thank you.
Any other questions? Jim Fitzgerald.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just think this is really important and timely work. And I just wanted to ask that, as this work progresses, you coordinate with us, the city. We have the Plan Mbta effort going on. We have the Blue Hill Ave multimodal corridor effort going on. So I just wanted to, request that you coordinate with us on this work, this really important work. So.
Of course, and the BPDA and City of Boston Transit Equity staff is on our list of outreach that we're going to do as soon as the work begins, which will be this afternoon.
Awesome. Yeah, if I can help in that regard, let me know. Thank you.
Lynn Dickens.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So Mr. Rourke, can you define maybe a little bit more what you mean by needs?
Sure. So we're defining needs as a community's needs of to access outdoor recreation space and green space, and identifying needs in this case as transit equity populations that lack access to those spaces, and specifically access to Blue Hills in this case.
Right, I got you. So I just, this is just maybe a little bit of caution I want to express, is that I hope that when we do outreach to communities that we don't try, even unintentionally, to make them feel that they should want to go to the Blue Hills. Because they may not want to, and that's okay. I think we should provide access to it on an equitable basis. So just be a little careful, and so that, because the deal is that you may do this and you might find that there's little utility, or you may even find that the people that you reach out to, or the people that attend the meetings, or the people who want to go, that may not be like the majority of the community. It might not be a matter of that community feeling dejected. It may be that they just aren't particularly interested. And so it's just a little bit of caution, but really I do support this project, and making things equitably accessible by anyone who wants to go. And so thank you.
Thank you. And that is the type of issue that we're hoping to enter sort of sensitively into this conversation, and that's what we think the advisory group will be able to help us with in terms of having that appropriate perspective, and being able to enter the conversation credibly with the backing and support and help of the advisory group, advocacy and community level members.
Excellent. Thank you. Appreciate it.
Any other members with comments? Seeing none, Steve Olenoff.
I just wanted to say that there's plenty of demand there for people that want to go to the Blue Hills, and this project for a large part is just meeting that demand. People that don't have a car just can't get there, and for all sorts of reasons. I know Lynn in the past you mentioned just hiking, but it's way more than hiking. People just going down to get away, picnicking, swimming at Houghton's Pond, and a lot of activities, the Trailside Museum, the Weather Observatory, lots of things to do in the Blue Hills. So this is a great project, and I think it's just answering that demand that's already there. Thanks.
Yep. Can I get a motion in a second to approve the work scope as presented today, please? And please state your name for the record. Lynn Diggins.
Lynn Diggins, I motion to approve the work scope.
Tom O'Rourke.
I'll second that motion.
Thank you. Motion having been made and seconded. And please call the roll.
Mascot Chair,
Yes.
Mascot Seat 2,
John Bouchard, yes.
Mascot Highway,
John Romano, yes.
MBTA,
Jillian Linnell, yes.
Massport,
Looks like Sarah Lee has left the meeting or dropped out maybe.
okay, thank you. MAPC,
Eric Barassa, yes.
MBTA Advisory Board,
Brian Kane, yes.
Advisory Council,
Leonard Diggins, yes.
City of Boston BTD,
Bill Conroy, yes.
City of Boston BPDA,
Jim Fitzgerald, yes.
Everett,
Jay Monty, yes.
Newton,
David Kozas, yes.
Arlington,
Daniel Amstutz, yes.
Brookline,
Brookline, yes.
Somerville,
City of Somerville, yes.
Acton,
Austin Saganowitz, yes.
Framingham,
Dennis Giambetti, yes.
Beverly,
Darlene Wynn, yes.
Burlington,
Melissa with Burlington, yes.
Rockland,
Jen Constable, yes.
Medway,
Town of Medway, yes.
and Trick, the Chamber.
Tom O'Rourke, yes.
And that motion passes, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Next item is proposed transit asset management state fiscal year 2022 update and targets. Michelle Scott and Laura Jen Linnell, who's ever going first.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Good morning, everyone. My name is Michelle Scott, and this morning I'll be presenting with Jillian Liddell from the MBTA on state fiscal year 2022 transit asset performance targets. Next slide, please. So just three major takeaways for today's presentation. First, the purpose of the conversation. The Federal Transit Administration, or FTA, requires transit agencies and MPOs to set targets for transit asset management, or TAM, performance measures to meet federal rules. Our recommendation for the MPO's action today is to update existing MPO TAM targets to reflect state fiscal year 2022 TAM targets submitted by the transit agencies. This is in keeping with the process that the MPO has carried out over the past couple years. The opportunity we have through this discussion is for the MPO to consider transit asset performance as part of considering capital programming that's included in the TIP. There is a memo for this presentation available on the March 17th page of the MPO meeting calendar. Next slide, please. Here is an overview of the material we plan to cover. I'm gonna, in the interest of time, just highlight 2 points for that first item for the overview and upcoming activities. At the next MPO meeting on March 31st, we will be having another conversation with the transit agencies regarding transit safety performance targets. And to learn more about the MPO's performance-based planning and programming process, you can visit bostonmpo.org/performance. Next, I'm going to give a brief overview of TAM requirements and performance measures. I'm going to turn things over to Jillian to talk about the MBTA's targets. I'll briefly cover the Regional Transit Authority targets. We'll talk quickly about next steps and opportunities, and then we'll take questions and the requested action for today. I ask that folks hold all their questions until the end so we can get through both the MBTA and RTA targets. Matt, would you please skip ahead to the slide titled TAM Basics, please? Thank you. So as I mentioned, FTA has established a TAM rule with the goal of improving transit asset state of good repair for better service delivery for transit customers throughout the US. And these rules create responsibilities for different entities in the process. Transit agencies and state sponsors of transit agencies must develop TAM plans that outline how transit asset condition will be improved over time. They are required to report asset inventories and condition information to the National Transit Database, and they are required to set performance targets for established measures each year. MPOs are required to work with transit agencies to set TAM targets for their specific regions. For this process, we work with the MBTA, the Metro West Regional Transit Authority, or MWRTA, and the Cape Ann Transportation Authority, or Cada. The MPOs also consider transit capital programming in the context of TAM performance, and they incorporate TAM information and targets into their planning documents, such as the LRTP and the Transportation Improvement Program, or TIP. Next slide, please. I'll briefly touch on transit asset management performance measures, and Jillian will give a little bit more context about these in her part of the presentation. These measures cover a subset, transit system assets, and focus on specific condition metrics for specific asset types. So this table highlights several different asset categories, the measure, and finally what kind of measure it is. The first two are rolling stock, which is vehicles that carry passengers, and equipment, which is service vehicles such as transit police cars or maintenance vehicles, are both measured by the percentage of vehicles that have met or exceeded their useful life benchmark. This is a measure of age that identifies once a vehicle has passed beyond that age, it might be likely to be beyond a state of good repair. Facilities are measured using the Federal Transit Administration's Transit Economic Requirements Model, or TERM scale, which is a comprehensive measure of the condition of a facility, with 5 being the best and 1 being the worst. This measure looks specifically at facilities that have a rating below 3 on this scale. Finally, infrastructure or fixed guideway, such as commuter rail track or heavy or light rail track, is measured by the percentage of track segments with performance or speed restrictions by mode. In the case of all of these measures, our goal is to minimize the percentage of assets that fall within each category. Next slide, please. In terms of the transit asset management performance targets, these are follow a 1-year time frame. In the case of our agencies, the state fiscal year. They are based on their transit agencies' condition assessments, their planning for upcoming investments, and their financial projections. So these features, combined with a short time frame, make them function more like forecasts. FTA does not give rewards or impose penalties depending on whether transit agencies, states, or MPOs achieve these targets. When proposing state fiscal year 2022 regional targets, MPO staff incorporated the targets received from the transit agencies, as we have in past years. MBTA, Cada, and MWRTA targets are listed separately, as you'll see in the memo. Tables 2 through 5 capture these targets, and that information begins on page 6. One thing we have done is, in some cases, to collapse or reorganize some of the asset categories. So from there, I'll turn things over to Jillian to cover the MBTA's targets. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. I'm going to move rather quickly in the interest of time, but we are available for questions at the end. So as Michelle already detailed, each year the MBTA is required to report performance measures on the state of our asset classes at the close of the fiscal year. So in this case, we're talking about the close of fiscal year 21, which ended last June. And we must also set performance targets which reflect the projected state of each asset class for the coming year, which is fiscal year 22. As required by FTA, there are 4 asset categories that we report on. Actually, we could go to the next slide, which are outlined here. And I do want to note that the MBTA's asset inventory is more comprehensive and covers more asset categories than are identified here. But this presentation is based on the final TAM rule and the specific areas that the MBTA is required to report on annually to the NTD. So next slide, please. For those of you that have seen this presentation in previous years, we always like to start by taking a moment to recognize some of the capital projects that are driving our overall asset conditions and performance. So starting with rolling stock, there are currently a number of fleet procurements, both recently completed and those that are still underway, that are driving the performance and asset condition of our rolling stock. They include the completion of the Green Line Type 9 procurement, with all 29 new Type 9 vehicles being accepted and are in service by the end of fiscal year 21. We have the ongoing delivery and acceptance of the Red Line, Orange Line fleets, the completion of a van and automobile procurement to replace our paratransit fleet. And we also continue to make progress on our bus fleet replacement and overhaul programs, and have a number of ongoing overhauls and procurements of commuter rail coaches and locomotives. Moving into equipment, our previous procurement programs for non-revenue vehicles have largely wrapped up. And at this time, we are only expecting the procurement of a handful of vehicles to support South Coast Rail and the replacement of a small number of aging vehicles in the transit police fleet. Under facilities, we have the Green Line extension coming online with a number of new facilities and stations. We also have the recently completed B Branch station consolidation project. Regarding our parking facilities, the Braintree and Quincy Adams Garage Rehabilitation Project is getting close to finishing up, and a number of commuter rail station improvement projects are underway, including Natick and Winchester, and we have a number of ongoing improvements to our bus and rail facilities. Finally, for infrastructure, we continue to improve our commuter rail track on the Haverhill, Newburyport, Rockport, and Worcester lines. On the Green Line, there is the addition of new track with GLX and work along the D Branch. And as a part of the Red Line, Orange Line transformation program, we continue to work to replace track in problem areas in order to improve reliability. Next slide, please. So moving into the specific performance measures and targets, we will start with rolling stock. Michelle already covered this, but just as a reminder, vehicle condition is measured as the percent of vehicles that are at or beyond their useful life benchmark, which represents the end of their expected life cycle based on the type and age of the vehicle. And a lower percentage for this measure reflects better fleet condition overall. Next slide, please. This jumps into the specifics a bit more. So on the left-hand side of the slide, you'll see the list of asset types followed by the calculated fiscal year 21 performance measure and the fiscal year 22 performance target. Within revenue vehicles, the percent of vehicles at or beyond their useful life benchmark for articulated bus, light rail, heavy rail, commuter rail coaches, and paratransit automobiles decreased in fiscal year 21 over 20. This is a positive direction and reflects the ongoing replacement of these vehicles. From 20 to 21, the percent of older revenue vehicles in the fleet did not change or stayed steady for trolley bus, vintage trolley, commuter rail, locomotive, and ferry vehicles. Paratransit vans are the only category with an increase in the percent of vehicles at or beyond their useful life, and this was driven by delays in retiring older fleets at the end of 21. Instead, a number of those vehicles were retired in early 22, which has been reflected in our target. Looking at fiscal year 22, our targets do reflect an anticipated lower percentage of older vehicles in our fleet for heavy rail, commuter rail locomotives, paratransit automobiles, and paratransit vans. Next slide, please. Moving on to non-revenue vehicles, again, condition is measured here as the percent of non-revenue service vehicles at or beyond their useful life. The MBTA has a very diverse fleet of over 1,000 non-revenue vehicles that range from police, motorcycles, and cruisers to specialized track equipment and snowplows. Additionally, in some cases, the equipment is stored indoors and used sporadically and therefore can perform well beyond its useful life. Next slide, please. The percentage of non-revenue transit and commuter rail vehicles at or beyond their useful life benchmark decreased in 21 due in part to the retirement of older vehicles. However, the percentage of non-revenue vehicles beyond useful life is expected to increase in 22 as vehicles that are used sparingly continue to age. Next slide, please. Facility condition, as already previewed, is the percent of facilities that are ranked below a 3 on the 5-point FTA term scale. Using that scale, a score of 5 indicates excellent condition and 1 indicates poor condition, with a score of 3 indicating adequate condition. The term rating is the composite score generated from an on-site assessment of multiple components, and a lower percentage for this measure reflects facilities in overall better condition. Next slide, please. Looking at the MBTA's facilities, the MBTA continues to invest in state of good repair and modernization improvements to passenger, parking, maintenance, and administrative facilities, And many of these improvements will continue to be reflected in condition assessment data beyond this window. Specifically, the performance measure calculation for 21 does reflect the expanded accounting of facilities compared to previous years, which means that a significant number of pump rooms and other facility assets that were previously considered a component of a larger facility, now at the request of FTA are being counted as standalone facilities, which is why you see such a drastic change from 20 actual to 21 actual. In 22, we are expecting facility condition will improve slightly and or remain constant due to the completion of several station projects and the expected opening of new stations and facilities along the Green Line extension. Next slide, please. Infrastructure is the track condition is measured as the track condition, the percent of track distance with speed restrictions, which are track segments where reduced speeds are required to ensure a safe and comfortable ride. This measure is used as a proxy for track condition with a lower percentage reflecting tracks in better condition. Next slide, please. Track condition is expected to improve in 22 across heavy rail, light rail, and commuter rail. This is due to ongoing track work and the removal of speed restrictions, including many of which that are due to construction. The 22 target for light rail also accounts for the additional 4.3 revenue service miles associated with the Green Line extension. So that concludes my very quick review of the MBTA's performance measures and targets, and I'm happy to stick around and answer any questions after Michelle finishes her portion of the presentation.
Thank you, Matt. Could you skip us ahead to the RTA rolling stock slide? So just to build off of Jillian's comments, and thank you, Jillian, for those. This slide shows the passenger carrying vehicles for Cada and MWRTA. You can see that the vehicles in Cada's various categories are expected to remain consistent from the end of fiscal year 21 to the end of fiscal year 22. MWRTA is removing automobiles from its passenger carrying fleet, and they're expecting a slight increase in the number of cutaway vehicles beyond their useful life. One thing to note is that compared to the MBTA, Cada and MWRTA have smaller inventories, so it takes fewer vehicles to kind of trigger a swing in the percentage changes for these measures in one direction or the other. MWRTA continues to aggressively pursue opportunities for vehicle improvement, but changes in these performance measures do depend on when procurements can happen and they can bring new vehicles into the fleet. Next slide, please. As you can see, Cada and MWRTA equipment vehicles, also measured as those at or beyond their useful life benchmark, are expected to remain consistent from the end of fiscal year 21 to the end of fiscal year 22. Next slide, please. In RTA facilities, of which Cada and MWRTA each have one administrative and maintenance facility, are expected to continue to remain in a state of good repair. Next slide, please. So just to connect this overall process to things happening at the MPO, in terms of improving transit assets, over the course of the next several MPO meetings, we'll be hearing from the MBTA and the RTAs in more detail about their upcoming investments to be included in the MassDOT CIP, which allocates federal and state dollars to CIP programs that support MBTA and RTA asset improvement. And as part of selecting projects to get funded by these programs, the scoring systems that these entities use consider asset condition and opportunities for improvement. As the MPO, when these discussions happen at our board meetings, you can consider these investments in the context of the transit assets performance information that you've heard today. Over the course of the longer term, we continue to work as MPO staff and coordinate with the transit agencies in our region on the development of our transit modernization program, which is designed to help improve assets and systems for our region's transit agencies. Our first year of programming, I believe, starts in federal fiscal year 2025. So we'll be continuing to work with you all on developing and building out these programs as we go into our LRTP development season this fall. Next slide, please. So just a reminder for our requested action, MPO staff requests that the Boston Region MPO move to support this set of state fiscal year 2022 TAM targets. The time frame for us to take up this action is during the 2023 to 27 tip development cycle. The next step for MPO staff will be to incorporate this target information into our 2023 to 27 tip, along with information about how our investments throughout the region are expected to improve progress on TAM performance measures. Thank you for your attention. I'm happy to take any questions, and there are representatives of all three transit agencies here to take questions as well.
Thank you, Michelle. Brian?
Thanks, David. I just wanted to thank Michelle and Jillian and Angela Cervello for all the hard work that went into this, and especially on the MBTA side, especially on their responsiveness to comments and requests for improvements over the year since last year. I think this is a very user-friendly presentation. It really makes it easier to see where things are moving. And I think it also, while every single individual metric might not be where we want it to be right now, I do think it's important that we pause and note that even just a few years ago, we didn't know any of these conditions. The T has made remarkable progress in not only knowing what its inventory is, but being able to track it. They have a third party doing the analysis, doing the grading, and reporting it out publicly. And that is a thing that deserves to be celebrated and noted. And I am very grateful to the T for doing that and for putting this effort into it. And I certainly would support and urge all of my colleagues on this board to support the staff recommendations set of targets. Thank you.
Thank you, Brian. Any other questions or comments from MPO members? Seeing none. Brian, you want to make a motion?
Why? How did you know, Dave? I move acceptance of the staff recommended set of state fiscal year 2022 TAM targets.
Thank you. Lynn Diggins.
Happily second that motion. Lynn Diggins.
Thank you. Motion has been made and seconded. Ann, please call the roll.
Okay, Mascot Chair,
Yes.
Mascot Seat 2,
John Bouchard, yes.
Mascot Highway,
John Romano, yes.
MBTA,
Jillian Linnell, yes.
and is Massport still gone? Are they here?
I do not see them.
Okay, MAPC,
Eric Barassa, yes.
MBTA Advisory Board,
Ryan Kane, yes.
Advisory Council,
Leonard Diggins, yes.
City of Boston BTD,
Bill Conroy, yes.
City of Boston BPDA,
Jim Fitzgerald, yes.
Everett,
Mwrta, yes.
Newton,
David Kozis, yes.
Arlington,
Daniel Amstutz, yes.
Brookline,
Brookline, yes.
Somerville,
Somerville, yes.
Acton,
Austin Saganowitz, yes.
Framingham,
Dennis Giambetti, yes.
Beverly, Darlene Wynn votes yes. Burlington, Matt, did Burlington leave?
Maybe circle back.
Okay. Rockland,
Jen Constable, yes.
Medway,
Peter Pelletier, yes.
Trick, the Chamber,
Tom O'Rourke, yes.
and Burlington.
Might be having an audio issue, Ann.
Okay. That motion passes, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Ann. Next item on the agenda is a discussion of the FY 2023-2027 Transportation Improvement Program. Matt Genova.
Great, thank you, Mr. Chair, and good morning, everyone. My name is Matt Genova, and I manage the Transportation Improvement Program, or TIP, for the Boston Region MPO. Today, I'll discuss a handful of initial programming scenarios for new projects being considered for funding this year in the federal fiscal years 2023 through 27 TIP. Here's the ground that I'll cover in the coming slides. I'll start by highlighting the goal for today's conversation, followed by a quick reminder of where we are on this year's TIP development timeline. I'll take a few minutes to review the written public comments submitted to this board since the last MPO meeting on March 3rd. From there, we'll dive into the main portion of the presentation, which again is an overview of initial programming scenarios for the 2023 through 27 Transportation Improvement Program. In closing, I'll touch on a handful of next steps before opening things up for what we hope will be a robust discussion. As is customary this time of year, there are a number of resources posted to the MPO meeting calendar under today's date for your review. Each of these documents are meant to supplement the material that I'll have in my presentation, and the goal is for these materials to be helpful references as we jump into the discussion. Available for your review are several items, including a compilation of the written public comments that we've recently received on the TIP, a separate comment letter on the public process surrounding the Belmont Community Path. This is a letter that was originally submitted to the board back in March of 2021, but was reposted for reference as requested by this board during the last MPO meeting. Also posted are a packet containing one-page descriptions and scoring summaries of every project seeking funding this year, and a one-page set of tables that further condenses the scoring results for this year, also as requested at the last board meeting. Finally, there are 3 scenario tables posted, which will be the focus of much of today's presentation, along with a short summary of readiness and cost updates for projects that are flagged in each scenario. So to set up today's discussion, I want to highlight here at the outset the principal goal for our time together today. So the goal for today is really to discuss the board's preferences for funding new projects in the fiscal years 23 through 27 TIP. We'll discuss multiple initial scenarios today, with the primary objective being to get enough feedback on these scenarios to inform the development of a final scenario or multiple scenarios for the next MPO meeting. And before we dive in, it's always useful to remind ourselves of where we are in the overall timeline to make sure we're on track in the coming weeks. So as I've already noted, today's conversation is really focused on new programming scenarios. As is the case each year, we'll need to have a final draft scenario agreed upon by the end of March, meaning that we have one more meeting after today to make these critical decisions. The scenario that's drafted by the end of the next board meeting will be included in the draft TIP, which we anticipate releasing for public review in late April. And all this puts us on track for a final TIP endorsement by this board in late May. So I'd like to highlight the public comments that we received on TIP projects since this board last met on March 3rd. Again, the full text of all of these comments is available on the MPO meeting calendar for your review. And before we get into the written comments, take a minute to thank all of the project proponents who took the time to come and speak at the outset of today's meeting during the public comment period. As always, it's very heartening to hear the local support for projects and to really understand what's going on at the community level behind each of these projects. So we certainly appreciate you taking your time today to be with us and to participate in the conversation. And I'd also like to say, on a personal level, thank you to those of you who offered kind feedback on my efforts to help you understand the TIP, but I would be remiss if I didn't take this as an opportunity to recognize all of my colleagues who helped make this work possible. So I know you all hear from me often up here presenting, but it really is a team effort. So I'd like to use this as a chance to once again say thank you to all of my colleagues on MPO staff, but also all of my counterparts at our partner agencies at MAPC, MassDOT, the MBTA, and the RTAs. It really does take a village to make the TIP happen every year. And so always want to take the opportunity to say thank you to everyone who plays a role. Diving into the written public comments. Over the last 2 weeks, we've received 13 written comments on 5 prospective TIP projects. We've received 1 letter of support for the bicycle parking project at Chenery Middle School in Belmont. This letter is from the Belmont Transportation Advisory Committee. In the letter, the committee highlights that a majority of the school's 1,400 students live within biking distance, and more than 100 students bike to school every day in nice weather. The committee states the importance of providing covered bicycle parking for year-round biking, and notes that this project is part of a broader effort to promote safe walking and biking throughout Belmont. Next, we've received 2 letters on the Belmont Community Path. The first is from Aleda Leza, who writes on behalf of 8 other abutters to the proposed project, as well as some other town residents. In her letter, Ms. Leza replies to the questions raised at the last MPO meeting about the extent to which the project's design has been responsive to abutter concerns. Ms. Leza states that the abutters' concerns have not been fully addressed, including unresolved issues around the proposed fencing, trash collection, safety at the commuter rail crossing, tree preservation, and stormwater drainage and snow removal. Ms. Leza also notes the general sentiment among some abutters that the town and consultant have not been interested in fully working with them to resolve these issues, including providing an example where one abutter was unable to get clarity on a property line discrepancy, which is yet to be addressed. So we've obviously heard some other feedback in today's public comment period about this project. Please sort of consider all of this as a whole. And the other letter we received at this on the Belmont Community Path is a letter of support for the project from Eden Insanik, a resident of Belmont. The letter states the importance of the project for creating safe walking and biking connections between the middle and high school and town center and the commuter rail station, and requests that the project be funded in this TIP cycle. We received 2 letters of support for the Blue Bike System expansion and station replacement in Cambridge. These letters come from the Alewife TMA and the Harvard Square Business Association. Generally, both letters note the importance of the Blue Bike System for promoting sustainable multimodal access to key destinations throughout Cambridge and across the region, including both Alewife and Harvard Square. The letters highlight that this project will continue to expand the system to provide Blue Bikes access to more people, while also ensuring that the existing system continues to meet users' needs by maintaining a state of good repair for some of Cambridge's highly used stations and docks. And both letters obviously support the funding of this project this year. Up next, we received 7 letters on the Swampscott Rail Trail. The first 6 of these letters are support for the project, and these were submitted by several folks, including State Senator Brendan Crichton, the East Coast Greenway Alliance, the Swampscott Conservancy, Swampscott Public Schools, the Swampscott Open Space and Recreation Plan Committee, and the Friends of the Swampscott Rail Trail. And we heard from some of these proponents earlier in the meeting today. Collectively, these letters note the importance of the project as a regional connection between existing shared use paths. And the letters highlight that this project is critical for creating safe, accessible connections between critical local destinations, such as local schools and the town center. And many of the letters note that the project will help to promote sustainable transportation and mode shift, and that the project has broad support at the local level. We also received a 7th letter on this project. This one is from Marzi Galaska, the Director of Economic and Community Development for the town of Swampscott. Ms. Galaska writes in response to, again, some of the questions that came up at the last MPO meeting about the extent to which the project has been responsive to local concerns. So in her letter, Ms. Galaska highlights the long-running effort to advance the project, which has been a topic of conversation in the town for several decades. She notes that Swampscott Town Meeting took votes in 2005, 2006, and 2009 in support of the project, including the use of eminent domain, and then subsequently voted by a margin of 210 to 56 in 2017 to approve a warrant article to advance the project, including funding for design and right-of-way acquisition. She further notes that the June 2017 townwide vote, or in June 2017, the town took a townwide vote to support the project, and the project was supported by a margin of 12%, that there is also an advisory committee that has been created to solicit feedback on the design of the trail. So the letter does note that there are still ongoing conversations with the abutters to resolve land ownership issues, but that the town has the tools that they need to resolve these issues in support of the project. Finally, on our list here, the MPO staff received a letter of support for the Route 20 and Wellesley Street intersection improvement project in the town of Weston. And this letter comes from Megan Jopp, the executive director of the town of Wellesley. Ms. Jopp notes the regional importance of the project for promoting safety and access, not just to the town of Weston, but also people who live, work, and study in Wellesley and across the region. The letter requests that this project be funded by the MPO in this tip cycle. And this came up earlier in the public comments for today, but there were a handful of other letters that did not make it into the packet today. And so those will be brought to this board in writing for the next MPO meeting on March 31st. Those include a letter of support for the Belmont bike rack project from the Chenery Middle School PTO, a letter of concern about the Belmont community path from an abutter to the proposed project, and a letter for the NUMO microtransit service expansion project in Newton. From Newton's Mayor, Ruth Ann Fuller, and that is a letter of support. So again, those comments will be brought back to this board at the next MPO meeting. With all of that in mind, let's dive into a discussion of the initial funding scenarios for this year's TIP. So as a reminder, MPO staff have scored 25 projects for funding, with roughly 2/3 of those projects having been scored in previous years, but not being funded. These projects span 5 of the MPO's investment programs, including 11 community connections projects, 8 complete streets projects, 2 intersection improvement projects, 2 bicycle and pedestrian projects, and 2 major infrastructure projects. As is the case each year, a majority of the new funding this board can allocate to new projects is available in the 5th and final year of the forthcoming TIP, which is in fiscal 2027. Unlike in most years, however, there is also new funding available in each fiscal year of the TIP, beginning in fiscal 2023. And as we've discussed in recent meetings, this is due to the passage of the bipartisan infrastructure law back in November. And so I'll come back to those numbers in the coming slides. So I do want to provide a little bit more information specifically on the Community Connections Program, as some questions were asked by this board at the last MPO meeting about the current status of the program. So if you'll remember back to last fall, which feels like an eternity ago at this point, but was surprisingly only about 4 months ago, this board had a series of conversations on how to approach the Community Connections Program for this year. These conversations were prompted by the fact that staffing limitations between MPO staff, MAPC, and MassDOT's Office of Transportation Planning limited the capacity for taking on the contract administration for community connections projects. So the result of those conversations was that this board wanted to pursue a collective purchasing model for the capital projects funded through the Community Connections Program, while still allowing all proponents, including both RTAs and municipalities, to apply for funding for transit operating projects such as microtransit and fixed route shuttles. So this year we had 11 total applications for funding within the program, including 2 bicycle parking projects, 3 blue bikes projects, and 6 shuttle and microtransit projects. And those shuttle and microtransit projects were evenly split between RTA-led and municipality-led projects. So after discussions between MPO, MAPC, and MassDOT staff, it was determined that there remains sufficient staff capacity to award funding to a selection of these applications in this TIP cycle. That being said, one of the goals for today's conversation is for this board to provide staff with clear guidance about your preferences for funding new projects through the Community Connections Program. This includes both the number and type of projects so that staff can confirm administrative capacity in the coming weeks before a final funding scenario is agreed upon by this board. This is something that we will obviously come back to in the discussion at the end of the presentation. So I want to come back briefly to the funding landscape for this year. You all have seen this chart a number of times before, but I thought a quick refresher might be helpful as we dive into the scenarios in earnest today. So represented in blue on the chart is the funding that we budgeted for in the current TIP, which covers fiscal years 2022 through 26. The orange bars here represent the new funding from the bipartisan infrastructure law, which will be the basis for funding levels in 23 through 27 that we are discussing today. The upshot here is that we'll see about $20 million in additional funding in each year beginning in 2023. And additionally, the $132 million in 2027 is entirely unallocated at this point to specific projects or programs, as this is the new 5th and final year of the forthcoming TIP. So I'm not going to go into all of the project readiness and cost updates in detail, as these were posted and shared with the MPO back in February. But again, if you do want the details, there is a handout, a 2-page summary that's posted to the MPO meeting calendar under today's date, and you can sort of reference these there. But again, 3 projects were flagged as high risk, 2 projects were recommended for delay. And then the other updates from readiness days were that 3 projects met the MPO's new 25% cost change threshold for warranting a little bit further investigation. We've since heard from multiple of these proponents. And so if there's sort of a request for more information on any of these, please don't hesitate to ask during the discussion period today. But in the interest of time, I'll let you all sort of review these details as posted, and we can come back if there are questions. So one other refresher getting to the scenarios now. I'm sort of catching up with my own slides here. So the goal of the scenario exercise is really to provide this board with multiple lenses through which to view project selection in order to really begin to assess trade-offs between different approaches. To that end, 3 scenarios have been included in the meeting materials for today. The first one should look pretty familiar, as this is the baseline project readiness scenario that was presented to this board back on February 17th. This was reposted today for reference purposes and is really just a reminder of what our starting point is for this year in terms of the decision-making landscape. The focus of today's conversation will largely be on the other 2 scenarios. Scenario 2 applies the TIP project scoring criteria as its central lens, prioritizing the projects with the highest evaluation scores in each investment program. And the third scenario applies a cost effectiveness lens to project selection, prioritizing funding for projects that could be considered the most efficient use of MPO funds. So in the coming slides, I'll walk through each of these scenarios in order, but I really want to emphasize before we get into these that at this point, none of these scenarios are a formal recommendation from MPO staff for this year's TIP programming. These scenarios are simply a starting point for discussion today, and so none of the funding for individual projects or programs should be taken as a formal proposal. So there are a number of baseline assumptions that are reflected in all 3 scenarios. So all of these scenarios reflect the most current project information available to MPO staff, including information on each project's design status and cost. Each scenario also assumes that the MPO will want to continue level funding for the transit modernization and community connections programs. Those are at $5.5 million and $2 million per year, respectively. Each scenario also accounts for project readiness, meaning that projects that were recommended to be delayed to a later year by MassDOT during readiness days have been shown as such in the scenarios. And then finally, all 3 scenarios assume that this board will opt to fund the 3 cost increases that exceeded that 25% threshold that we touched on earlier. And of course, this board is ultimately the decision-making body here. And so if you would like to not fund these cost increases or suggest a different approach to these projects, you are certainly welcome to propose that. So again, scenario 1 really reflects our baseline conditions for making new funding decisions this year, and is really just included in today's postings for reference purposes. So in this scenario, no new projects are yet proposed for funding, meaning that nearly $284 million is available for programming this year, including significant amounts of funding in both fiscals 23 and 24. So because this is review, I'm not really going to spend a lot of time on this one, but I will linger on these sort of detailed tables a little bit more for the other 2 scenarios. And these year-by-year summaries are available at the bottom of the last page on each posted scenario, and is really a summary of the sort of 6-year funding picture, including the current federal fiscal year. The key takeaway from the first scenario, which again is our starting point for this year, is that, again, we'll have about $284 million to potentially allocate to new projects in this TIP cycle. Scenario 2 proposes for funding for the highest scoring projects within each investment program, striving to maximize the number of these projects that can be programmed for funding in both 2026 and 2027. The projects funded in 2026 are those that already have submitted their 25% design plans, while the projects funded in 2027 are at earlier stages of design. This scenario funds 16 new projects in total, including both bicycle and pedestrian projects under consideration, 1 intersection improvement project, 5 of the 8 complete streets projects that were scored, and 1 major infrastructure project. The scenario also proposes funding for 7 of the 11 community connections projects that we scored this year. In this scenario, roughly $111 million in funding remains unallocated to specific projects or programs, primarily in 2023 and 2024. And of the projects funded, 2 of them are only shown with partial funding allocated. Those projects are the McGrath Boulevard project in Somerville and the Western Avenue project in Lynn. These are both higher cost projects that can be funded over multiple fiscal years. Of note, this scenario also shows 2 projects as proposed for funding by MassDOT in the statewide highway program. So right now, both of these projects are proposed for funding using CRISA funds, meaning that the MPO would not need to fund these projects using regional target funds. So getting into the summary in a little bit more detail, you can see that scenario 2 leaves nearly $111 million unallocated to specific projects or programs between 2023 and 2027. And most of this available funding, about $96 million of it, is available in the first 2 years of the forthcoming TIP, while 2025 through 2027 in this scenario are approaching full allocation. We'll come back to this in the discussion today, but a priority of today's meeting is really to begin to determine MPO priorities for using these early year funds in 2023 and 2024. Moving now to scenario 3, the scenario prioritizes funding for the most cost-effective projects as determined by an analysis of cost per point plotted against project score. I'll go through this analysis in more detail in the coming slides. So in contrast to scenario 2, this scenario takes a more conservative approach to funding new projects, primarily funding most new projects in 2027 and leaving more funding in 2026 available. That's largely why the overall total funding available in this scenario is roughly $50 million higher than in scenario 2. In total, scenario 3 proposes funding for 18 new projects, including the same 2 bicycle and pedestrian projects and the lone intersection improvement project that were included in scenario number 2. As you may imagine, in a scenario focused on cost effectiveness, some smaller complete streets projects are proposed for funding that weren't proposed in scenario number 2. And those include County Street in Ipswich and Central Street in Manchester by the Sea. These 2 projects replace a larger complete streets project in Weston on Route 30. On the community connections front, the 6 highest scoring projects are all still proposed for funding in scenario 3, just like in scenario 2. But in this scenario, scenario 3, the more expensive Cada on-demand project is replaced with 3 lower cost projects, including Metro West RTA's microtransit service and bicycle parking projects in Acton and Belmont. In this scenario, no new major infrastructure projects are funded, and partial funding is allocated to the 2 largest complete streets projects under consideration, which include Western Avenue in Lynn and Washington Street in Brookline. This scenario similarly shows that MassDOT has proposed the same 2 projects for funding in Natick and Milton, and so these are not proposed for funding using MPO funds. So at the last MPO meeting, MPO staff were asked to bring back an analysis of cost effectiveness for projects under consideration for funding this year. Shown on the slide here is one version of that analysis, which plots cost per point against the evaluation scores for each project. This should look familiar to many of you, as this was the same methodology that was used during the TIP project cost change committee conversations last summer and fall, and that was presented to this board back in October and November of last year. And so before getting into a little bit more explanation of this analysis, I'll highlight that on the scoring summary table posted for today, you'll also see another cost effectiveness metric, and that is cost per mile, included for all of the non-community connections projects. And this is really meant to be another tool to understand how efficient each project is in addressing the transportation needs in the region. So in selecting projects for inclusion in scenario 3, this analysis prioritizes funding for those projects in tier 1, which are the highest scoring and the lowest cost per point. And those projects include the Swampscott Rail Trail, the reconstruction of Park and Pearl Street in Chelsea, and the Boston Street Improvement Project in Salem. The dividing lines between tiers on this chart are determined using the median value for both project score and project cost per point of this sample. Tier 2 projects were prioritized for funding next, followed by Tier 3 projects. And as I flagged earlier, some of the smaller complete streets projects, including those in Ipswich and Manchester by the Sea, sort of rise into Tier 2 here and are proposed for funding. And so one thing I'll flag on this analysis is that projects that are a little bit more expensive on a cost per point basis, including projects like the reconstruction of Route 30 in Weston and the Mwrta Boulevard project in Somerville, are both much more efficient uses of funds when looked at through a cost per mile lens, as these are both much larger scale projects than many of the others in the sample. And so again, if you look at that scoring summary that's posted to the meeting calendar, you'll see that cost per mile column. And these two projects specifically jump out as ones that look significantly better on that metric than in the cost per point metric that you see on the slide here. And so we also did this analysis for community connections projects under consideration for funding this year. These were broken out into a separate analysis because these projects are significantly smaller in size. And so looking at them on the other chart would not really provide any meaningful distinction between them. In this analysis, the 3 Blue Bikes projects are all included in Tier 1, as they are all pretty high scoring and relatively low cost. And both bicycle parking projects are in Tier 2, that bottom left-hand quadrant of the chart, meaning that these two projects are a little bit lower scoring than the median project in the sample, but are both incredibly efficient on a cost per point basis because of their very low costs. In the upper right-hand quadrant, which is also sort of Tier 2, are the Newton Microtransit Service and the Pleasant Street Shuttle in Watertown, both pretty high scoring projects. And then there are 2 projects that are sort of on the border of Tier 2 and Tier 3, which include the Crosstown Shuttle Service in Stoneham and Metro West RTA's Microtransit Service expansion. And then finally, 2 of the higher cost transit operations projects, including Microtransit Service for both Cada and the Montechusett RTA, are both in Tier 3, that bottom right-hand corner of the chart. And so again, these results are really just meant to be one tool in the toolbox to help you all think through project programming for this year. So again, please consider this information alongside all of the other information that we've shared on these projects, both in this meeting, but also in prior meetings. All right. Coming into the home stretch here. So this scenario leaves roughly $162 million in total funding unallocated across 5 fiscal years of the TIP, representing about 25% of funding available over this period. And in contrast to scenario 2, which allocates a vast majority of funding in both 2025 and 26, scenario number 3 leaves more of this funding unallocated on top of the unallocated funding in 2023 and 2024, which stays fairly consistent in both scenarios. Again, we'll come back to a question on what to do about this at the end. And so I thought it might be helpful to wind down the scenario discussion with just sort of a side-by-side comparison of the high-level takeaways from each scenario. So as you can see here, both of the new scenarios for this week make significant progress towards allocating the funding available to the MPO this year. But what you may also notice is that both new scenarios leave nearly $100 million in funding unallocated in those first 2 years of the TIP. Again, the priority for today will be to have a conversation about how this board would like to approach that question. So our overall goal for today is really to for MPO staff to get enough feedback on these initial scenarios that I just presented to really inform the development of either one final scenario or a range of final scenarios for the next MPO meeting. So please don't be shy. If you have thoughts, questions, concerns, now is definitely the time to share those. And if you need more information on any of these projects, please don't hesitate to ask for that as well, because we really want to ensure that your voice is represented in the final scenarios for next week. Before we get into that discussion, a couple of quick next steps. So again, we really need to have a scenario wrapped up by the end of next MPO meeting on March 31st. That puts us on track to have a draft tip released for public comment in late April and endorsed in late May. And I'll turn it over to the chair for a discussion. And during that discussion, I would just like to have a handful of questions up on the screen here for your reference. And so please consider these as we're moving through the discussion. So, really the sort of 4 key questions here are: first, what options would the MPO like to see for addressing those funding surpluses in 2023 and 24? Second, to what extent would the MPO like to allocate all of its outer year funds? And, should some funding be left unallocated? Third here, what are the MPO's priorities for funding projects within the Community Connections Program? And then fourth, is there any additional information that staff can provide in the development of final scenarios and decisions? So thank you all for your time, and I'll turn it back over to the chair. Thank you.
Thank you, Matt. Lynn Diggins.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just a quick question, Matt, and great presentation, Matt. Where do I find the cost per point and cost per mile on the cost effectiveness PDF?
Yeah, so on the overall, there's a 1-page sort of 11 by 17 table that has the scoring summaries for all the projects. And there's a column there that has cost per mile. So I didn't include cost per point because that was included in the slides for today. But cost per mile is here. And so between sort of what's in the presentation and what's in the handout, you have both.
I must be on the wrong handout. So it's not on the scenario 3 handout, it's on a different handout?
Yeah, there's a 1-page scenario that's just the scoring summary. So you'll see all the scores broken out by, by scoring area.
All right, so I'll go and find that one. Thank you, appreciate it.
Yeah, you're welcome.
Eric Barassa.
Yeah, thank you, Matt. Really, really great overview. Just to, provide some response to these questions here. For question number 1 about, what options would the MPO like to see for addressing the funding surpluses in 23 and 24? Maybe this also goes to the 4th question too. I'd be really interested if there are any projects that are sort of in our universe or on the tip that could potentially be moved, forward. And I would look for MassDOT if there's any indication. I know there was tip readiness, but if there's any sense that any projects could move up and go into those spaces. Secondly, I would really love to see if there are any MBTA priority projects that also could be ready that could go into those spaces. And I'd love to see if they could bring some of those to the next meeting. And yeah, I would say those are probably my thoughts for 23 and 24. For the second question, to what extent would the MPO like to allocate its outer year funds? I do like the scenario number 2. And I do feel that, and I actually was really happy to hear that it sounds like MassDOT with additional resources is committing to the Route 9 Natick project. And I'd love, maybe the chair could speak more to that, but I do feel that we need to get Rutherford, we need to get the McGrath project on the tip, given where it is in the plan. And so I do support that. And for the community connections programs, Matt, I wasn't clear, can we fund all of those projects or are they not? Does the request exceed what the available funding is? I wasn't clear on that. I apologize. Maybe that's an easy one. I definitely think the capital projects would be a priority, and then I'd be sort of interested in maybe more discussion on the and input from others on the transit projects. So those are my thoughts right now. Thank you.
Thank you, Eric. Daniel Amstutz.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Matt, for the presentation, as always, guiding us through and helping us get to this point, and I will second Eric's comments that he made and some of the questions about MBTA projects and other ways to kind of fill in these gaps or these open opportunities for funding, shall we say. I will just make a couple more comments and then ask sort of two big questions regarding FFY 23 and 24. In general, I think that the scenario 2 is more preferable. I definitely would support putting money on the McGrath Highway project as it is in our long range plan, and it seems like things are starting to move a little bit on that project, but putting some money out there in the outer year to give it some to make sure that we're putting money on that to give it a better timeline or a more concrete timeline. And in general, the approach of putting or programming projects that are score high. And in terms of community connections, I think, again, I agree with Eric on the capital projects. I think what I would say about certainly the transit operating is that I think what I recall from our discussion in fall from so long ago was that it is much more having the RTAs involved with those projects. It seems to gives it much more likely that those projects can be implemented. And the other ones, while certainly laudable projects, there's concern about how those would be overseen, or the contract administration piece of it. So I wouldn't want to. So I'd be concerned about the other ones if that would be a problem. So anyway, so my big two questions about the 2023 and 2024, hopefully to be answered at some point, and maybe taken separately, is really the questions are, do we have to program all of the funding in 2023? Can any of it be pushed back or shifted to a later year if we don't have enough projects to fill in the gap? And then secondly, in terms of filling in the gap with projects, are there any projects, would it be possible to have, like, if you had a municipal project that is moving along with the design but has never actually gotten into the MassDOT project through the PRC or so on, maybe it's at 75% or something, would anything like that be eligible to be pushed in there if some kind of review could be accelerated for that, so that we're not, I guess, if there's possible to open it up if there are any projects out there like that. So just leaving that out again as maybe two big questions to be taken. So thank you very much.
Brian King.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I want to agree with Eric and David broadly on advocating for scenario 2. It seems to be the fairest way to do it. And I also think Eric had a great idea in seeing if the T has any projects we can move up. I would specifically encourage the authority to try and federalize some of these projects for which operating money is being shifted to capital to mitigate the pending fiscal cliff in fiscal 24. In terms of allocating the out year, I think we're actually going to have a little bit of flexibility. So I have a feeling that some of these projects that are currently on the tip will be funded with ARP money. And that's actually my fourth question. What if any of these are eligible for ARP or are being considered for ARP at the local level? And in terms of community connections, I agree that we should support the capital over the operating projects. It just has the biggest bang for the buck. I apologize for speaking fast. I have to actually go to a 12:30. So thank you, everybody. I'll see you next time.
Dennis Giambetti.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just a couple questions and maybe a comment. The question regarding the Natick Route 9, 120 and 27 project, what does it actually mean, the state's committing it to the, use the state dollars? How does that process work? And what level of commitment is that?
So it's not state dollars, it's state controlled federal dollars. So
Gotcha.
you
Yeah,
will
okay, yeah.
you will see it programmed in the STIP with non-MPO target funds.
Okay, so we'll be in this SIP. Okay, great. Okay, and it goes through that process. Great. My other question is do we have any projects that are currently programmed for 23 and 24 that have some risk associated with that, cost-wise? And, you know, does it make some sense to reserve some of those dollars, because we always run into the, you know, into the dilemma of having some cost overruns. So I would think about keeping some of those dollars available for that, so we don't have to move a project in, and then all of a sudden now we're in a dilemma of having to move it out or do something else with it. So that would be my suggestion.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Monty.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just want to say I agree broadly with Daniel and Eric's comments. I generally like scenario 2. I like that we're including one of our longtime major infrastructure projects, McGrath, on that scenario. That's important. 2 things I just want to note. One is that, you know, as a policy decision, we, you know, decided not to program projects that were not 25% submitted. I do see a number of projects here in the middle and outer years that are not yet 25% approved or submitted. So I think we just need to maybe discuss that a little bit and make sure we're okay with that. Number 2, with regard to the inner years, I'd like an interpretation from Federal Highway as to whether unused funds in, say, 23 and 24, you know, what actually happens to those if they go unused? Can they be shifted to later years? Does the MPO have that ability to make that decision? And you know, I think it is also fine to leave some unprogrammed funds in the outer years as well at this time. So those are my comments.
Thank you. Tom Bit.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. First of all, I want to say that I agree with most of the comments about scenario 2, obviously on the McGrath Highway. But also, I was actually glad when Matt spoke on scenario 3 and explained how, you know, that's cost per point. But when you look at it on cost per mile, you know, the larger projects actually look quite a bit better. So I appreciated him bringing that up. But I do agree with Eric's and Jay's and Daniel's comments about the different issues that they brought up. I also wanted to mention too, in scenario 2, I was glad to see that Belmont's in there because there's been a lot of community support for that project also. So, so right now, you know, I'm looking at scenario 2. Thank you.
Thanks, Tom. Kim Miller, do you want to answer Daniel and Jay Monty's question? I see your hands up.
I had a couple of comments. I can address it. It's not, but
okay.
Yeah.
You can just make your comments, Ken. That's good. I mean, I think I know what the answer is. So
yeah, I'm sure you do.
Go ahead, Ken. I'm sorry.
Just a couple of comments. Thank you, Matt, for including the cost per mile. I think that's helpful. I'm not sure it's always the appropriate. I think there's other information that would also be helpful, particularly for projects like the intersection projects. I'm not sure cost per mile may be the most appropriate unit cost kind of factor. Maybe there's something else that, you know, cost per intersection or cost per, you know, approach or something like that might be better. I would also suggest perhaps if there was a way to include a cost of a unit cost, which is not the same as cost effectiveness, but a unit cost for the community connections projects. I think, you know, they provide that information when, you know, these have to qualify for CMAQ information. They provide the worksheets, which include the estimates of the number of users, whether that's riders or bicyclists or whatever, because that's required to be able to estimate the air quality benefit. So it would be great if you could think about how to incorporate some kind of cost, whether it's annual user or something like that, to get some kind of sense of the unit cost for those kinds of projects too. Regarding Jay's question, from an annual state perspective, I'm not going to talk about the MPO particularly. The annual obligational authority that's available through federal highway cannot be, at least for federal highway, FTA is different. For federal highway, it has to be, if you don't use it within a year, it goes away. Now, for any particular, remember the target, targets for each MPO is a construct that the state and the MPOs have agreed to in terms of how funding is allocated among the different programs. If there are mechanisms to shift money around, well, that would certainly be up to the state and the MPOs to figure it out. But from the federal perspective, obligational authority cannot be transferred from year to year.
Thank you, Ken. Lynn Diggins.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I did find that sheet, Matt. It's great. It's well done. And I asked you a question first, and then maybe through the chair asked Mr. Miller a question. Now on the cost effectiveness, you have the graph. Can you discuss where the lines are set? The thresholds are set, and the rationale for that?
Yeah. So the dividing lines are set by the median values for each measure within each sample, and so cost per point and overall score for both samples of projects respectively.
Okay. So it's a function of the projects that's under consideration. So those lines get changed from year to year based on the nature of the projects. Interesting way of doing it. That's an interesting way. So through you, Chair, to Mr. Miller. So what you mentioned that the number of intersections per project could be a metric. Any other ideas for possible metrics for cost benefit, cost effectiveness?
Well, again, I think there's a distinction to be made between unit cost, which is a piece of information that can be helpful in terms of gauging whether a project is an outlier in terms of, and asking why something costs so much or costs so little. Maybe they didn't estimate it correctly, which is different from cost effectiveness per se, which is the relationship of the benefit to the cost. So I think we need to be careful about distinguishing unit cost and cost benefit. Now, the cost per point is a measure of cost effectiveness. Now, in this case, your scoring system is not related to the size of the project, so that's why you're going to see some, the bigger projects do better on cost per point, and the smaller projects do worse. I mean, that's just the way it's going to be, because your cost effectiveness system is not related to the size of the project, and the size of the project is related to cost. So I think it's just more information, like Matt says, but you have to be careful. You have to know what you're looking at and have to be careful about, how you use that information. Does that answer your question? I don't know.
Yeah, no, that's helpful. Thank you. And I'll just say that I'd also like to see us consider, maybe funding more community connection projects, and maybe increasing the funding for transit modernization, especially for the couple of years in the near term, where we just may not be able to get more projects that we consider a good use of the money. And I realize that cost effectiveness is a really hard thing to work on, but I encourage us to work on it just like we worked on equity. That's really hard too, but I think, it's good to figure this out, especially as we try to justify, our projects to the wider community, our selection to the wider community. Thank you.
Jim Fitzgerald.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Certainly, historically always been very supportive of the McGrath project. Just want to know more on MassDOT's thoughts about sequencing with Rutherford. Obviously, we've always talked about Rutherford kind of getting done first, and obviously now we're delayed a couple more years. So certainly support McGrath project. Just wondering if it can work on a timing perspective with Rutherford. Don't know that you have any answers, but
Yeah, I got no answer today. Other comments or questions?
Yes, Mr. Chair, would you mind if I jumped in to just respond to an earlier question?
Sure, go ahead, man.
Okay, thank you. So I did just want to respond to, I think Eric had the question sort of at the outset of the discussion about the extent to which our community connections projects sort of use up all of the funding for that program. So both scenarios show approximately $2 million worth of projects funded in that program, which is, $2 million is the annual allocation that we've set as a body for funding for that program. So, this board could say, as some people have sort of alluded to already, we'd be interested in seeing more than $2 million of those projects funded in any given year. And then, if that were the desire, then, staff could sort of go back and determine funding, the actual administration capacity for doing that. But both scenarios stop the funding recommendations around $2 million, just to sort of say, sticking within our initially allocated budget, this is what something might look like. So.
Thanks, Matt. Any other MPO members before I call on non-MPO members? Seeing none, Rich Benevento.
Thank you. Just a quick comment on just a couple of things. One, I had a question for, I guess, Matt, and that is the cost per lane mile. Is that based on the linear feet of roadway or the cost per lane mile? Just curious on that one.
Sorry, can you clarify the distinction between the
so is it center line or lane mile?
So it's lane mile for all the projects except for the bike ped, and the bike ped projects are just sort of one sort of center line, assuming that it's one lane.
So just based on the Weston Ave one, there might be I think Weston Ave is about 2 miles long, which would give us 4 lane miles. So again, that was just a comment. Actually, the comment came from Mr. Clausen. He just says asking me about it. So I just thought I'd bring that up. The other thing I would like to bring up too is I know the MPO through Eric's subcommittee has had a discussion about not programming projects until the 25% design has been submitted. And I know that the MPO staff or the staff have recommended 2 projects, in particular, Weston Ave and Lynn and Washington Street, Brookline. Those projects are underway in an earnest manner of design, but the 25s have not been submitted. And again, programming a project 5 years out, I think a couple of things are going to happen. One, certainly if the project's programmed, I think that's a carrot, not just for the communities I'm talking about, for any community to advance their projects if their projects are programmed, because once they're programmed, they don't want to lose that spot, certainly. And then secondly, even at the 25% design phase, and we've had this discussion several times, we do have a preliminary design phase estimate. But that estimate is going to change quite a bit between 25 and 75 because more of the details of the project are going to be identified. So this sort of, I know the community said, gee, we don't want to program projects because we don't want to program before we have a good feel of what that project cost is going to be. But even at 25, the project cost is going to change. So, so I guess I'm advocating for the staff's recommendations to include these projects, these 2 in particular, again, high scoring projects, but currently underway with community meetings and preliminary design and 25% pre-scoping meetings already completed and so forth to support those projects for programming. So thank you.
Any other questions or comments at this time? Seeing none, we'll see you back here next week on this issue. Is it next week or 2 weeks? 2 weeks, right, Matt?
That's correct, 2 weeks.
Okay.
Thank you.
Next up is member items. I want to go first because I would like to remind people at the beginning under Chairman's report, I mentioned that we have FY22 bill money now to program. So at the next meeting, in addition to talking about the 23 STIP, we will probably be talking about a possible amendment to FY22. So there's roughly $19.5 million more in 22 than we had planned. In addition to that, we may be recommending defunding the last CMAQ contribution to the Green Line because we got additional money from the feds for under the COVID response. So there's a chance we don't need that money. So somewhere between 19.5 and $46.5 million, we're going to be bringing an amendment in 2 weeks to try to do something with that money in 22 to Ken's point, so we don't lose it. Other member items, Eric Grassa.
David, thank you. Just on that point, you will be bringing specific projects as an amendment. Is that what you're saying?
I hope so, Eric. That's my plan anyway.
Okay. Right. Okay, so great. I wasn't sure if you were saying we were going to discuss that or whether we were, there's actually going to be a action anticipated. So thank you.
Yep. Other questions, other member items? Brad, wait. Any members before I call on non-members? Seeing none, Brad Rawson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Your mention of Green Line just reminds me that although Mayor Ballantyne's remarks today did not specifically address Green Line, we want to thank the MPO board and staff for more than a decade of important advocacy and funding allocations to get the Green Line into service. We are cutting the ribbon. If you can build time into your schedules, please do join us at 11:30 a.m. at New Leechmere Station. Revenue service for customers will begin during the morning commute hours. The Green Line is real, folks, and you all have your fingerprints on it. Bravo and thank you.
What's the date, Brad?
Monday, March 21st, Mr. Chairman, 11:30 a.m. at Leechmere Station in East Cambridge.
Thank you, Brad. Great event for everyone. A lot of hard work by a lot of people, most importantly, the city. Tom Bent.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just wanted to second Brad's comment about all the help and support over the long years of getting us finally to this point. Very exciting, and also wanted to extend that invitation out, and can't wait to get on one of the trains on Monday and get from Leechmere to Union Square. So this is very exciting, and I wanted to thank everyone for all their work. And you, David, I know a lot of work on your end, a lot of different phone calls over the years trying to make all this happen. So thank you very much.
I still use my GLX coaster all the time, which those who weren't there was part of the gift basket we received from the city when we signed our full funding grant agreement.
Yep.
Any other member items? Seeing none, can I get a motion in a second to adjourn, and please state your name for the record when making the motion. Tom, I see your hands up. Why don't you make the motion? All right, Eric Barassa, make the motion.
I'll make that. I just got unmuted. I'll make that motion for adjournment.
Thank you, Eric Barassa.
A great meeting today, everyone. I second that motion to adjourn.
Thank you. Motion having been made and seconded. Without objection, we are adjourned. Great job, staff. Great job, everybody. Thanks.